And once you're in the building, they're not really here. So, yeah, my friend is, I've done that. It's not his friend.
And we could do that too. You know, if he feels like he doesn't want to wait for 2026.
Good. Yeah.
Great.
Things are becoming a little more manageable right now. No, there's a lot of this.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It was difficult to keep a good balance for a while.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Say for everybody who's online, do you mind giving me a sound check? Were you able to hear, folks here in the room?
All. Sometimes just.
Oh, I'm seeing some thumbs. Okay, thank you, appreciate it. All right, let's see. But I moved 8.
Yeah, and then like the one day he sits down, so you can shit it up. Yeah. So.
The 3
Balls there, right?
Yeah, that's the different one.
8,
We have about 6.
7, and 8, because Mike is here. 4 by me.
I'm sure that's not changed.
My link. But I don't see. Yeah, we don't have Dave here yet. Jim, if it's okay, I'm gonna give us just another minute or two, because I think Dave Hamilton is coming, and he would give us quorum.
What's waiting for?
No, that's, well, I only read for read. I can read, I see the screen, it's great.
I'm like, I like.
And I computer wise, it's too late.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, okay.
I don't know how old you need to be for that,
You
but.
gotta be able to. But I mean, really valid. I'm 55.
See, I'm older.
You're off my lawn. Okay.
Was that Dave?
One more to go.
All right.
Thank you.
I don't give any respect. I don't.
I guess. 11%.
I got 76. So I'm trying and I don't.
I don't. I'm employed. Oh, I have heard of it. I don't know. If that happens, I'm gonna represent you guys, like those.
Yeah, state. That's the big one. She's very. Didn't
Didn't know.
Yeah. Ground. Sometimes we'll buy those. Bigger storms.
Oh, there we go. Oh, we have quorum.
I might be able to give you that impression.
Right.
Just close the door.
You just showed up late.
I said night.
I wanted.
Want to make that dramatic and welcome entrance.
So I forwarded it to him.
Sending Brian a text. I'm gonna love you.
I sent that to finance.
Oh, that's the way you said, oh, yes. Okay, yeah.
There you go. Everyone is welcome and you guys are especially welcome because now we have quorum. All right, are we ready to get started, everybody? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Welcome. Thanks everybody for coming in and for joining online. Just to make sure everybody knows where they are, we're at the Water Use Advisory Council meeting. Thanks for attending. Since we do have quorum, we're gonna go ahead and go through our agenda as written unless there are updates. So I'm gonna ask
Do you wanna do a roll call for the minutes?
exactly what I'm gonna do.
I
Yep.
jumped the gun.
You jumped the gun, Mike, but thank you for tipping off the next agenda item. Can everybody in the room introduce yourselves? We've got the recording for who all is participating online, Bree's confirming that. But let's go around the room so that everybody who's participating online knows who is here. Jim, do you mind starting?
Jim Melton, Water Use Assessment and Supervisor, Eagle Geologic Resources Management Division.
Megan Tinsley, Michigan Environmental Council.
Kelly Turner, Michigan Potato Industry Commission, representing ag irrigators.
Mike Frederick, Michigan Groundwater Association, alternate for Buddy Sebastian, who's out on medical.
Doug Needham with the Michigan Aggregates Association.
Dave Hamilton, retired from the Nature Conservancy.
Katie Lundstrom with Bar Insurance Company.
Joe Victory, Consumers, alternate for Rachel Proctor.
Abby Eaton, Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
Dave Matura, Michigan Lakes and Streams Association. Matura, Michigan Farm Bureau.
I'm Wimbledon, Michigan State University.
Megan Napier, Agency Fearless.
Andy LeBaron, Eagle Water Use Assessment.
Adam Wygant, Eagle Geologic Resources Management Division. Brian Burrows with Trout Unlimited, representing statewide angler groups.
Laura Campbell with Michigan Farm Bureau.
Pat Staskevich from American Waterworks, Water Spots.
Let's do the outside of the room as well.
Andrew Brown with Walter Farms.
Morgan Hayes with Michigan.
Michigan potatoes, all right. Awesome. How about the back of the room?
Eagle. Aaron Eagle. Mary Mary Eagle.
Simon Blue, Eagle with Great Lakes. Joel Henry, ECT.
Stephen Peppers, Eagle. Hagerman, Eagle.
We get everybody? All right. Thank you very much, folks. At this time, I know we had some comments and updates that were sent online, to make updates to our minutes from our last meeting in September. And I want to ask at this time if there are any additional changes or edits that need to happen with those minutes.
I received some notification from Katie Lindstrom, mostly just confirmers, so no major like narrative changes. Modification though from Michael Ellis from Bar, we'll back.
Any other amendments that we need to make to those minutes? Looking online, see anybody with their hand raised? I don't think they do. Okay. Well, with that, unless there are objections, we'll take a consensus that the minutes from September's meeting are approved. At this time, I'll ask if there's any additions that we need to make to today's agenda.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. If there are no objections, I'll take that as consensus for approval of the agenda. Hey, Frank, welcome. Glad you were able to make it.
Hi. Yep, sorry, I had trouble logging in, couldn't find the link, but I got it, so. Thanks.
That is quite all right. We're glad to have you. Okay. We'll pop on to our next agenda item. As you guys know, for those of you who have been attending these meetings all along, we do 2 public comment periods. We ask the first one be related to agenda items for today's meeting. We'll have another one at the end that can be about anything water and water use related. So at this time, I'll ask if there are any public comments related to today's agenda. Seeing none in the room and none online. All right. We will go ahead and move on then. I'll turn things over to, am I turning it over to you, Brian?
Yep.
All right.
All right. Thanks. We'll dig into the committee report section. We'll start with the data committee, and I'll give the update. We were able to have a good group meeting, and I guess the most important takeaway is that we won't be bringing forth any new brand new recommendations to this body for your consideration for inclusion within the 2024 report. As far as this report goes, what's most important to us is to make sure that we provide a good update of the implementation of past recommendations. For the data committee, there are 1 or 2 from the 2020 recommendations that are things that we know that we want to continue working on. There are several that are in progress with the models committee, and one of the most key ones that is uniquely within our is the long-term data planning recommendation. And that's really that work is meant to provide the foundation in the future for us to really provide a very robust, detailed, and well-justified recommendation for future data collection. All of our committee members know that we have needs now for more data collection, and we certainly could try to make good cases for those right now, but the real purpose of the long-term data planning was to really provide the basis of a really robust justification for it in the future. So stylistically, we're going to stick with getting that project done and using that to go forward for now. In addition, we'll have the 2022 report recommendations and trying to track again with the models committee, the downstream accounting related couple of them. And then uniquely the Inland Lakes ARI platform recommendations. So for us, we're going to be kind of turning over into this remainder of this year and the next into focusing on implementing those, and do not have any type of brand new recommendation for the larger body here for this report. Any additions from any other committee members of what I might have missed? An update? Questions?
Just that one, you said you were gonna tackle them on like ARS.
Well, the group can have a discussion of whether we want to create a standalone committee to oversee that, whether we want to have a work group within the data committee, but for now, the default is it's in our committee because we made the recommendation last time. So
I'm glad somebody's taking it off because it's an important topic that
until we decide,
nobody really wants to touch, so I'm glad you're bringing it up.
we made the recommendation from that committee, so it'll stay with us unless we decide that there's a different vehicle.
Thanks.
Okay. Moving on to the models committee. Dave, you do have some new stuff, right?
We do have.
Make sure and use your outside voice.
All right, here we go. So,
That's changed. Anyway, I thought I'd recap on what work groups we have going, because that kind of keys into what we'll be doing down the road and also some of our recommendations. So the Michigan Hydrologic Framework, I think that should be in bold, if the chair should not. Anyway, I think that's more important. So I'm chairing that work group. That is active. It is way behind from where we wanted it to be. And we've got a deadline of, was October 2016 to finish.
26.
October 26.
Yeah.
Thank you. High school, it's 10 years, not bad. So there's a lot to do in a relatively short period of time. I've been talking with Jeremiah Asher about it. He thinks they can still get it done, but I told him to keep it close, because if we need to take any shortcuts or make any modifications, we should think about that early, not late. So anyway, that is underway, and very glad that it's underway. Compiling key aquifer properties for use in the tool is also a very important project. This one's specifically looking at transmissivity and storage coefficients, which are two very important factors that go into the calculation that the tool uses. And we believe that when this is done, we will have a recommendation then to update the tool using this more up-to-date information, more accurate information. But we can't make that recommendation until we actually have data, and that's actually still out for an RFP that got hung up for an incredibly long period of time. Once it's going, though, it should go pretty quickly. It's a pretty straightforward process that needs to be done. The 3D glacial aquifer mapping in 2 counties is active. Dave Lush is chairing that. Dave Lush is chairing the other one as well. And that is underway. And Bar Engineering actually has a contract on that one. So we're looking forward to some good work to move that project forward. And just as a reminder, this is using a technique that, if it looks good, could be used in places where it's going to be years before we get the 3D geological information. And it could be something that can be done as an interim step. But we're looking at it, we're evaluating, compare it with what comes out of the 3D geological information, and see what we have. Something that looks really good, then we'll make a proposal to use that as an interim measure. Some places it's better than what we have now, not as good as where we're going, but it's going to take years before we get the full geological information pulled together. Versus this could be done very quickly. So we have some priority areas for that. That would be a good thing to do. Michigan Integrated Water Management Database has been folded into the Michigan Hydrologic Framework project. It's still its own distinct project. We'll have it as a sub work group overseeing the work, but it is very closely related to work that's being done in the hydrologic framework. So it made sense to fold it together and move things along a little more quickly and efficiently. Water user interface update. That's kind of taking life on its own, and Models Committee will just touch base with the department when that's done to see, make sure we like it, that things are good. So we will work with the implementation committee to make sure that as we finish up this year's report, we've got most up-to-date status of each of these, and wherever they are in the next couple of months, we'll just try to make sure we've got a fresh update for that. Next slide. These are the work groups that we have from the 2022 recommendations, which have been funded now. Brian's already alluded to them. We've got the Connecting Downstream Accounting Research, which MSU will lead. DNR has funding for similar work, so we're looking for close cooperation between those. That has to be worked out, but I'm sure that will be the common interest is very high. And then there's another one, which is evaluate stream flow depletion effects downstream through a stream network, which is largely modeling work as well as stream flow measurements. USGS is the lead on that. So the agreements are being developed. Hopefully they'll be issued in the near future. Get started on that. Brian, I took the liberty to ask Troy to chair a work group on that. And there'll be people from both models and data committees to be on that. Troy's been involved in this for a lot of years. And so I think you'll do a good job of leading that work group. And then if there is any progress in this before the report's finished, we'll provide that information as well. So any questions on those work groups? Thanks for them.
Where's Troy from?
He's with DNR Fisheries. He's a researcher for DNR Fisheries. He worked on the original tool. He was one of the main researchers on the fish populations.
Oh, Thanks.
Yeah, Dave, just an update on the downstream accounting research. Had some initial contacts with DNR Fish, so Eagle admin will be talking to DNR admin, we'll be talking to MSU, and looks like we'll be able to use the permit agreement that DNR Fish has with MSU and work through that.
Which should simplify the administrative side of things. right?
Yeah.
Good.
And then the evaluating the depletion effects downstream through a stream network, that likely is gonna be a new joint funding agreement. USGS.
All right.
Right, I know you've got some work that's been ongoing on site-specific reviews and on performance tests, all that kind of thing. Where are those sitting in terms of
Okay. Yeah.
their progress?
Thank you. I didn't put that in because it's kind of its own thing right now. But that one is that we put out a draft report that we thought was pretty close to being done. Had a lot of comments back on it. So the department's taken it and based on the comments it received is redrafting it.
Okay.
I don't know how long that'll be, hopefully not very long. But I will send it out again. Once they get another version of it, I will send it out.
All right, thanks.
And hopefully the rest of the report then for this. This has been a very, very long time. Okay, so now to our recommendations. They fall into three general areas. The first one is to fund an investigation or to investigate stream flow depletion in an area with significant large quantity withdrawals using detailed data collection and modeling. So the question has come up that, you know, how well do we understand stream flow depletion? And there's analytic models, which are what we use now and what almost everybody else uses. But we're looking for, can we gain insight from looking at an area that's actually having worked on, or is being actively pumped by streams and with a combination of very detailed data collection, both stream flow as well as monitoring wells, pump tests and modeling. Can we gain some understanding of how the depletion is working in the midst of all these wells? There was a study that I shared with everyone that Wisconsin did. It was an excellent study where they looked at the area of Little Plover Creek, where there's a lot of pumping and questions about how much depletion is on. So we will be doing something not exactly like it, but using some similar type of techniques. So it's to be both data collection and modeling. We are working on drafting what that's going to look like. So our models committee is going to meet in a couple days. We're going to go over another draft. And so I don't have a draft to share with you other than these concepts. But we are actively working on that. So before the next meeting, I have some kind of draft so that you guys will have something on paper to react to. But if there are questions on the concept, I would love to hear them, either suggestions of things that you think we should consider or any concerns you might have.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the Cass County pilot project, there is a ton of data that's there, and I think it was the optics was kind of what's holding that up and wanting to make some minor changes, but those minor changes would have cost a lot of money. And so I think the commodity groups that were funding that decided that it wouldn't change the outcome, so they weren't willing to fund that. We have all that data and that modeling that's been done there. Can that be used as part of your first recommendation, that overlap? Because
Possibly. I mean,
there's more data there than what they use for like the Plover River. And so data-driven, scientific, right? I think we carry a lot of weight with.
Yeah, and one of the things we need is we need cooperation from irrigators. For this to really work well, we need to have pumping data, history, just what's happening with real time and story. For this to really work well, that needs to be.
How many years of data is included in the Cass County pilot project?
I don't know.
I was thinking three, but
It could be.
there may be more, because I know those are actual real wells and real people.
Yeah.
So
So
and that's been 2 or 3 years ago. So we're looking at 5 years plus of cumulative data. in the parameters that you're looking for.
And I thank you for pointing that out. That is one of the considerations we'll have to look at is what data is available. We also want to look at very carefully the hydrogeologic setting. And make sure it's something we can work with and that it's going to give us useful information. We're not something that's so complex that it's not gonna, you figure out that one, how does it apply elsewhere? You need to think about that. This one. So thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions, concerns, or suggestions?
For your investigation of, stream completion using new modeling, are you looking at numeric models or?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. No, we don't need more Helen.
that's what I figured, but I didn't, I didn't want to assume.
Do I know what I really think? Okay, good. No more comments on that. All right, the second one is that we as a committee believe it is a good time to revise the timeline and the site-specific review process. But the 10-day timeline, for those that remember, was imposed by the legislature with no consideration of any, let's workload or whatever. I was involved in negotiations. I was lucky to get away with 10 working days as opposed to 10 calendar days, which is what they originally wrote in. But that still left us with a problem. The problem really came to a head with the audit that was done last year, earlier this year. And it pointed out a number of issues with the program, but that was one of them. And so the department will be responding to this audit. And so they will be coming forward with something that will make a recommendation as to how to revise timeline, i.e. 10 days for a site-specific review. So our committee believes that, yes, there should be a modification to this, but we haven't tried to work it out. We brought forward a couple of meetings ago some ideas. There was some pushback and suggestions, and what I would like to do is that a couple of people that really had concerns with it, I would like to invite Laura and Doug to join with me and some discussions. Let's see if we can draft something out. And I have Jim Mill involved in it as well. My ideal is that we can have something that the department can live with, that we can live with, and go to legislature with that. And that is something that we would all be happy with. So that's the goal of it.
Okay, and you want to include it in the 2024 report?
Yes.
Okay, we'll have to meet fast then.
Yes. Well, I don't know what their plans are for the legislature, but we need to do it before they plan to go. And I think the time is, we can get it in this report, that'd be great.
But I think, we had some legislative interest in this, following up on the audit. So whatever the council does in terms of recommendation, that's maybe got synergy with legislative champions. Good, that we're all on the same page to the extent.
Yeah, well, I think if we have consensus recommendation in this council, that's going to speak a lot to the legislature. All right, is there anyone else that really wants to be distracted working? I think you're well represented. Okay. Okay. The third one is that we'd like to improve the stream flow depletion calculation that is in the tool right now. And let's go to the next slide. So I've presented this to you a while ago. So I'm just going to give it a very short review just to refresh people's mind. I'm not going to go into all the detail that we did before. If you want more detail, I'd say let's talk on the side, unless there's really a demand for much more detail here, which usually there isn't. But I want to spend a little time explaining or reminding you what the current tool does, and then talk about what this proposed change would involve. So next slide, please. Thank you. So in the middle of this diagram, there's a pumping well, and the arrows are connected to every neighboring water management area. The nearest stream within that water management area is located, and then the distance is calculated from that to the well. So it does it within its home water management area, looks for what's in my nearest stream here, and goes to every neighbor to that water management area, no matter how near or how far, or no matter what streams or rivers it might cross, it looks for that. And so, it then makes a calculation, a depletion calculation from that point. So the home watershed is one point there, and then it's a point for every neighboring water management area, the nearest stream to the well. It makes the calculation for that. This would invariably bring in some nonsensical answers. Just doing this, just on the face of this, you start looking at it, it's like, man, you're going far away and you're crossing rivers and doing stuff. And in reality, a dry outcome doesn't develop that way. So as we developed this method, we said, well, we've got to do something to try to eliminate these nonsensical answers. So that's where the half max rule came from. I might even pull up this half max rule.
That's fair.
And it was actually a good faith effort to eliminate nonsensical answers and to try to bring this method closer to the reality by eliminating small depletions, small faraway depletions. So the next slide. We lost the tape. I think we lost the. It got whited out. All right. Well, I'll tell you what's there. So on the first line, it gives the ID number for the water management area. Then it gives a depletion of about 83 gallons per minute. And that was the maximum depletion in that water management area. The next one is another water management area, and its depletion was about 53 gallons per minute. Now, the way the half max rule is that you look at the highest depletion, which in this case was about 83, you divide that by 2, that gets you about 41. And so anything that's less than 41 gallons per minute is dropped off. So all these other depletions, so there's 5 other wells in neighboring water management areas are just dropped from the calculation. And the way the system works now is that it just goes with those top 2, and that's what goes into the tool. Now, there's a problem with this, is that, and actually it's an error in this, that what it should have done is that what the system here is doing is saying, it's trying to identify, these are the streams that are most likely to be depleted from this withdrawal. And it actually doesn't do a half bad job of identifying that, but then it should have recalculated the depletion based on those streams and then got bored of that. It didn't happen. The reason it didn't is at the time I was told we couldn't make that calculation for whatever the reason was. It can be done now. So the error could be completed or it could be fixed. But we actually have something that is better than that we can propose instead of just fixing this. So let's go to the next. Well, are there any questions? This is how the current system works. Any questions on that?
I get confirmation that it was a solution to try to get rid of some like false positives. And it could miss a couple of ones, you know, some watershed that should have a little bit. And then the second is it shows what, one distance from the well to, is it the nearest location on the stream or just the watershed boundary?
No, on the stream.
On the stream.
So it looks at each of the water management area boundaries, but it's like what stream within that boundary is closest to.
It kind of shows the closest point on
Right.
each surrounding stream.
Right, it's always looking for a stream. Any other questions? All right, next slide. So Sam Zipper, a few years ago, he was looking at the same problem that we looked at when we developed this tool, this process. And he liked what we did. We really did break a lot of ground in what we put together. And so he looked at how we did this stream flow depletions. He said, that's a good idea, but I think I could do better than that. And that's exactly what he did. And I'm going to skim through what he did. Again, if you want to go into detail, let's do it on the side, but I'll try to give you the highlights of what he did to, so you can see what this proposal would do. The next slide, please. So if you went through a number of different Well, the first thing you need to do is select what stream segments you're gonna include in your depletion calculation. So there's a number of different ways to do that, and I won't go through each of them, but the one that we chose was the expanding,
Adjacent.
expanding. Can't read that either, Gabby. And so that's what we're choosing for this method. And then you have to figure out, okay, what portions of the streams are you going to include in the depletion calculation? So there are different methods, and the one that we're choosing is what's called the Webb squared way, and that's so it's both of the figures the furthest to the right are the ones that we chose. And then for the actual depletion calculation, it's the same Hunt equation that we use in the tool is used here. So what's being changed is how you choose which stream should be depleted, and then how you choose what along the stream is actually being depleted. Let's go to the next slide. So this is just kind of a blow up. I won't go through the mathematics of it, but there's a way of how it's choosing streams. But I think the figure on the right is a good one to conceptualize what it's doing. So it's picking the stream networks that are close. It doesn't have to be a contiguous stream. It may be one part that's going off to the north, another part that's going off to the east, another part that's going off south. It'll pick up the ring of the elements of those streams that are close to the well and they're subject to depletion. So this is a much better representation of how a drawdown cone grows. It's going to grow until it gets enough water to satisfy the demand. But it tends to go out in a conical fashion. And so if you have a stream that's kind of wrapping around it, it's going to draw a lot more water from that stream that's wrapping around it, the one that's just kind of zipping by off on the branch. So it does a good job of picking up the geometry of the streams as well as how it's identifying what streams are nearby. So so a huge improvement from just picking a point on neighboring streams and then arbitrarily cutting off which ones going to be cut off. So there's actually part of it, the stream flow depletion goes into the calculations of which ones are nearby, and then a very sophisticated way of picking up the streams as to what is being depleted. So it's a very good method. And let's go to the next slide. So you already have a copy of this table, and I'm sure everybody studied it and remembers it well. I will just highlight a few main points out of this. So my color copy here.
Oh, thank you. It was better, actually. Thank you.
The main point is to show you the amount of detail that we went into in evaluating this to make the recommendation that we are within now. So there's 30 wells that were actually picked out a number of years ago, that they're spread out across the state, various kinds of hydrogeologic settings. And there are actual irrigation wells. And so we wanted these to say, okay, whenever we're evaluating something with our system, our process, these were kind of our go-to wells that we could test things, we could do a lot of different things with us because they gave us a good summary of what's actually happening within the world of the water withdrawal assessment program. So as you go across this table, is that the name of the well, what its well ID number is, which is a unique number. It gives the tool depletion calculation, and then it says the A is how many water management areas are depleted by this well. So like on the first line, there's only one. You get on further and you see there's sometimes two that are being depleted with this methodology. Well, if you go back in and you recalculate, like I suggest, if you drop off the wells that are less than half max, but you recalculate based on those more than that, it gives you a different number. And so that was done. And then that's compared with the Webb squared. So when you're using the tool, the recalculation, you're still using 1 point. Going to neighbors, 1 point off each one. The Webb squared is going off a suite of points off each neighboring well, each neighboring stream based on proximity to the
Yeah.
To the. So then we wanted to get more of a real world. These first columns are dealing with a single well, without a single well. So if you're running the tool, that's what the number would look like. But in the real world, you've got all these other wells that are already out there. And the question is, what's gonna happen when you have all of these wells up in, what is the depletion likely to be? So we took these 30 wells and their water management areas and whatever wells were within those water management areas. And so in the next set of cumulative depletion of all wells in water management area, you've got the home water management area. You've got the number of wells that are in that. So it goes from 1 up to over 50 wells in that water management area. And for every one of those wells in that water management area, it does the same calculation using the Web squared approach. So it's as if it was running the tool for each one of those when they came in to figure out what's the depletion. And then those are aggregated. So the comparisons here are then what the tool would show, tool depletion, and then what Web squared would be. And then the A is again the number of adjacent water management areas that are being depleted. So it can be more, it can be less, but what we're with Web squared is you're basing it not on proximity of water management area boundary, but on what streams are nearby. And then the last two columns are just, so what's the end result of that? What management area did we end up in? So if you look at the full scope of the 30, the vast majority of them, there's no change. They end up in the same zone. There are 3 that end up worse off that were in C than B and D if this was applied. And there's a couple that would be better off. They were in D or B and they would end up in A. So it can go in both directions. Typically, it's not changing that result. So any questions on that?
Dave, I've read the zipper paper, but it's been a while. Can you refresh my memory? Does the Web squared calculation include anything about specifics of the subsurface soil type or transmissivity or flow of those streams that might influence how much is actually coming out of those streams? Or is it kind of taking?
It's using the Hunt method for the actual depletion calculation. So it's the same thing as the tool.
Okay,
It's a uniform homogeneous aquifer with a stream that has a certain conductance. So it's exactly the same as.
Okay.
Did that calculation. But it'd be many, many points out when I see this other one.
yep. Oh, Frank's got a question.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yes, I just wondered how looking at with this new system, looking at this, how that may affect some existing wells and permits.
Well, that's why we did this, looking at these 30 areas. So what would it do? I want to talk about how would we implement this, which I think touched on this. Personally, I don't think that we should let's just apply this everywhere, just like, and number one, it'd be a huge workload on the department to do that. And everybody's already been through a process where they've said, hey, it's okay. So I'm not sure that that's what we want to do, is go back and just apply retroactively everywhere. Now, there may be places we do want to go back, but that'd be triggered by site-specific review, and we're trying to refine what's actually happening there. So this may be part of that, but it's not going to be the only things. We can do other modeling and other data collection to resolve the site-specific review. So I personally would not recommend applying it uniformly retroactively.
And remember, the rebuttable presumption in the statute would apply.
Yes.
So if a previous withdrawal was authorized, registered through either the tool or a site-specific review, there's a rebuttable presumption that that withdrawal will not cause adverse resource impact. And then the department would have to rebut that through a preponderance of evidence, i.e. over 50% likely that it would cause an adverse resource impact.
So I think we have enough things to spend our time on dealing with problem areas without using this to go more, especially with how labor intensive it would be to do that.
I guess, Jim, what you're saying kind of leads into my question is how do we verify that this is actually the case with the real world?
Let me jump in on that, Jim, because that is something that I think we as a council need to look at. Because the department at this point has not declared any water management areas in eminent ARI. That has not been done yet. It should be done. There's, what, about 15 or 20 water management areas that are in the red that they're looking at these in more detail, but they haven't made a decision yet on it. And I think there's huge policy and technical issues that go along with that determination. And I think we should dig into that and help provide some advice to the department in making that decision. But that's my sense of it.
Can I try?
Yeah.
I think what I hear you asking is, do we know that a cone of depression is uniform shape? Could there be a geologic formation under there that creates and changes the shape of that? There probably could be, but until we get the refined spatial data of what's under the ground, we're gonna keep struggling. So there's, improved transmissivity, there's hope for the MGS to do enough data points and interpolation between them. So I don't think it changes. Doing this, I don't think changes maybe the possible error of having like a different dynamic under the ground at one well that wouldn't be caught. This would probably still assume a uniform cone of depression. It would just be trying to address some of the error created by picking singular closest points on a stream and saying like, if the well's here and you have one stream up here and it dips down and then goes right back up, it's gonna say that's close, and it's gonna really pull from that stream, where you could have one that sort of wraps around. And right now we have, in my opinion, right, like an apportionment error based on going off the single points rather than the actual shape of the streams spatially in relation to the well. It would still have to rely for now on a lack of detailed geologic information to assume anything other than a uniform cone of depression.
That's right. And you're not gonna have a screening tool. Well,
Yeah.
you're not gonna have a screening tool that does that, except mid-modeling is something that we're looking at down the road, where that process is that, say you do some very detailed numerical modeling in an area, and then you can statistically represent that in a way that it could be used in a screening tool. But we're years away from that. Now, I'd like to see us get there, but we're near that. And
So you're not proposing that the web squared be the method by which, or the replacement method for the half max rule for the screening tool?
so we are recommending that it would become part of the tool.
Okay.
It would replace that max. So we still use a solution, but we would use this to figure out what streams and how to apportion.
And for the purpose of making a broad estimate that the screening tool does, and then if it pops up a potential depletion concern, then it goes to site-specific review,
Exactly.
where then you're collecting more, the actual on-the-ground data and looking at geology and transmissivity and all the things.
Yes.
Okay.
Dave, I understand your point that this is more accurate, but another true point is it's a lot of work to do it all. Could you put more context to that? I mean,
Well,
how much is,
what I took the question to mean is if we were going to say, retroactively go back to how many wells are in the system?
that's what I'm trying to get my head around.
Wait, no, it's thousands, whatever the thousands. So there's thousands of calculations that have to be done, and they've got to interact with each other. It's not a trivial problem. It's a project all on its own.
Right.
And I would argue it's not worth the effort now. I think that the things we're putting into place are gonna help improve the site-specific reviews, get the modeling done faster and better, and resolve areas where we've got the conflict. This will be more accurate in the screening tool, and other things that we are planning to put in will help make the screening tool more accurate. And so as we pick up problem areas through the screening process. We'll handle it in site-specific review, and that's where the real decisions are made, and we should really focus our energy. I'd rather focus our energy in getting good site-specific reviews than I would massive effort.
I totally understand. I guess for transparency, then how are we gonna know that what method was used going, is it just like a point in time? And we assume that everything going forward is gonna have the new method and
That's what I would envision, and, let me add a couple more things that's my thinking, that, we still need to finalize some of these details in the Wells Committee. But, I mentioned that one of the studies we're doing is looking at the transmissivity and storage coefficient statewide.
Yeah.
And our recommendation for that, assuming things are good, is to let's put that information into the tool now too. I would not want to do this and 6 months later do that.
Right.
I think that would be very disruptive to the program, very confusing to the users. I would rather take it as a package and be able to explain to users, okay, this is what we're doing, improving this to how we're evaluating depletion. We've got this to prove the depletion calculation and go forward with it as a package. I think that's clear, but then it would become a date, whatever date that is.
Right.
That's when we start implementing it live.
Frank, did you have another question, or is your hand still up from earlier? You'll have to unmute yourself if you want to talk.
Dave, do you have more, or do you want to see?
Hand is still up, sorry.
So,
Alexa.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Frank.
I just said it was a legacy hand. My apologies.
Okay. Hypothetically, one approach could be that the department, we do the current SSR methodology, and the answer is still no. Target some of these zone D water management areas, and then apply web squared. Some of the, and the other, look at other analytical solutions and see if that gets us to a yes. If it still doesn't, then you're back to your options of collect more data, doing numerical modeling, et cetera.
You have the flexibility to do that now,
Right.
if you want to. It is a tool that could be used to say. But what we're proposing is it will be done as part of the screening tool.
Any other questions in the room? Think about them for a second. We'll go to Todd Feenstra.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today. We have some stuff going on with our office space. I think I've seen this presentation 4 times now. And if I put my summary points on it from the last times that I've seen it, theoretically, this is still theoretical. It's not been proven out yet. And that was one of the hangups before. It does seem to be more logical. Zipper has done some study on it. They did some comparison with numerical. But we still don't know, like we keep hearing the word that it's more accurate. We don't know if it's more accurate or not. The other part that's missing with this is this web squared is telling us what streams to calculate depletion from, right? It's apportioning that portion of it, right? It's telling us what streams to grab this water from. But the underlying problem is still that the analytical models that are predicting depletion have a lot of error in them, a lot of error, which was just demonstrated, a couple of weeks ago in another meeting. So it's really a tough one to crack and show that this is actually better. We just don't know at this point. So I think when it boiled down to it, it was, look, the arguments for it are that it seems to make more sense. It's more logical. Zipper's done some work on it and there's some publications on it and maybe somebody else is using it. But the arguments against it still are, look, it's theoretical. It hasn't been proven out yet. We don't actually know that it's more accurate. It's a moving target. And we still have the issue with it's still being applied to analytical models. And I think the jury's out on those, whether those are actually going to be something that's useful and accurate enough for doing site-specific reviews. So that's just kind of the summary from what, I've listened to it 4 times now from what what I recall from those and from my notes on those.
I would push back on that, Todd, that, that if you don't want to use an analytical model, then forget, don't do pump test. Don't do any of these calculations. Because analytical models are the foundation to a lot of work that's done in hydrogeology. And setting up a screening tool, this is the only way that we could set up a functioning screening tool that would give us a quick answer. And so we tried to pick something that was realistic, and I think we did that. This is an improvement on what we did, and I think it's easily demonstrated that it is an improvement. If you want to question the foundation of the Hunt method or whatever, I mean, it's an analytical solution, which I'm the first one to say that there's better ways to do things than an analytical solution. But for a screening tool, right now, there's not another way to do it. And even when we get to the meta modeling, we'll still have, it's not going to be perfect, but it'll be an improvement over analytical models. But it'll have its own host of issues, and we're not there yet.
There we
So
go.
Analytical models are used, Dave, and we use them all the time in aquifer performance testing, but equating an aquifer performance test analysis to predicting stream flow is not a direct comparison or a fair comparison. They're very different purposes to those two models. And in a screening tool, we don't have other solutions. We're still using those analytical models in the site-specific review process as well. My point is still the same. We don't know how accurate it is, except that we know that the data is showing that there's some pretty significant errors, and we even understand where those errors are coming from. So when I look at it and you look at the amount of investment that would go into doing this, and then you look at what we're really gaining from that, we're not fixing the problems that are in front of us right now yet. There's still a proof problem. There's still a proof of concept problem. And we still haven't satisfied the scientific method on these. That's my opinion on it. So.
Well, I think the things that you're referring to, Todd, is that we need to look at, figure out what is going on with the thing that you identified, which still doesn't change anything that I said about the need for a screening tool, how a screening tool operates. If there's inherent limitations to the screening tool, then our option would be to make it more conservative so that we chip into a site-specific review earlier. I think we've built a fair amount of conservatism into the process. So that site-specific review is the decision-making place, and that's where you're not limited to analytical models. So that's where you can gather whatever data is needed, use whatever models are appropriate. That's the real decision-making. And I think that is quite distinct from a screening tool.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think there is still the problem. You don't know if this is an improvement. We don't know. There seems like it should be, but we don't know.
Yeah, my question, Dave, is when I'm listening, I'm kind of hearing, maybe wrong, but I'm hearing Todd talk about all the factors that may play into making a prediction somewhat different than what might realistically be.
Let me explain what Todd is actually talking about. Is that in the tool, when we have a situation where you've got intermittent pumping, otherwise it's not full-time pumping all year long, but it's intermittent through a season of the year. So how do you simulate that? And that's done by a series of, you start up the analytical model, you stop the analytical model, you start it. How does it identify that what looks like that there seems to be an increase in how much depletion there is every time you turn on and off? I think we need to look at that some more. You may be onto something for the transient case, and we need to look at it and figure out, okay, is it a problem? And if it is, what's a fix? And that's entirely different from the things we're talking about.
That was my question, I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm seeing this as just an apportionment piece related to this location of streams around a well.
Correct.
And if we fix or improve how we model cones of depression in the future, that's good. It sounds super necessary, but am I wrong in thinking this is just about the apportionment piece? So if we change this apportionment piece and later on we change analytical to numerical, we get more data, you could change that function again, still using this better apportionment piece.
That's exactly right. So there are three parts that I showed in the slide. First, you figure out what streams need to be included, how you're going to pick up the geometry of including those, and what's your calculation for conversion. Hunt is used in this, and the tool now is used in this. And that is what would change if Todd's onto something that's in Hunt solution that needs to be modified. It's not in identifying what streams and apportion.
So building on what Jim just said though, that if the current model shows that it would cause an impact, just as a temporary measure, or as I guess a movement prior to changing everything, what if that became kind of a department standard that says, okay, prior to doing site-specific review, we run it through this model to see what impact that has. And then if it says it's passed, or, then they rely on that. Would there have to be something written to make that a formal process? And again, I don't know how much work this would do to the department, but prior to just jumping in with both feet, maybe watch it for a little bit, see what that comes up with.
I mean, tool 2.0, so if it doesn't pass
Yeah.
the current tool, we run the zipper web squared as a tool version 2.0 and see if that gets us to a yes. If it still doesn't, then we're into the full SSR review, which leads us back to Dave's previous item number 2, the SSR deadlines.
Right.
So.
Well, and that's why I don't know how much.
These are approximations, and we're piecemeal making better approximations on portions of the process, but still got the underlying deadline issue. And if you're talking about, you can do a numerical model for everything, but that blows the whole concept of screening tools and 10-day deadlines right out of the water.
I guess, I'm sorry, Jim, are you?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess what I want to make sure we're not missing here, and Todd, please jump in, because I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like what we're discussing here, kind of the bigger problems with the Hunt model, is not really what you were talking about with your concerns with the web squared model in terms of not knowing for sure if it's more accurate. Is that correct? Can you clarify?
Yeah, happy to. It's the same problem with both of them. So we have an analytical solution that does a job of predicting depletion. We have a apportionment tool that tells us which streams to use. The problem with both of them is we don't know which one is accurate and which one isn't. We have no quantification of those. And we don't have field proof showing that it's actually occurring. So then we scramble for answers as to why not. And we come up with different solutions or different things to try. So they're connected. They're definitely connected to each other, but we have the same problem with both of them. Both of them are theoretical, and both of them are still lacking, a proof of concept, or following that scientific method of proving out what my theory is. I have no problem with agreeing with, and I do agree with that it makes more logical sense. I'm looking at it going, is it actually a fix? Is it actually better? How much better is it? Are we making significant changes? Is this oh wow, gotcha moment? Or is this just another way for us to try to find some more water or apportion it better or do something that makes sense? The harsh reality of Michigan glacial geology is it's extremely complex. It's extremely difficult to boil it down to a couple parameters that we can tweak. And that just makes it inherently difficult. So before we jump in on something that, may or may not provide a fix, it will be good to understand it a lot better as to whether it actually does make an improvement and how much of an improvement is that.
Appreciate that. I'll get to a couple more questions. I'm going to intersperse, say, Couple of the questions that I'm having though, is maybe one of them is burden of proof and one of them is a question of whether we ever will on a screening tool. How many years or decades, Dave, I'll say, is it your guess that it's gonna take where we would have better empirical information about the shape and extent of a cone of depression statewide to improve the screening tool? Will we ever have kind of proof everywhere in the state from a screening tool perspective that this captures?
I don't think we'll ever have that. I mean, even the work that John Yelch is trying to do is very coarse compared to what you need to do what you're suggesting. The closest thing, I think, is what we're talking about with the meta model, which is where you would use detailed numerical modeling to pick up everything you're talking about, all the complexities. And then you use a statistical process to translate that into something that you could use in a screening tool. That's the only thing I can think of that could become a screening tool that brings in the intelligence that you've learned from numerical.
Okay, so second question, maybe a little bit for Tom and Dave, is burden of proof. So without knowledge of, much better knowledge of every single part of this state where a well could go in, did you have a burden of proof when you did the half max that was accurately describing apportionment?
No, it was an expedient that made sense to cut out things that weren't illogical.
Okay, so in your opinion now, does this represent a better, fairer, more realistic approach than what you have? And if you don't have the proof, the standard of proof of empirical data that it's gonna be really accurate everywhere, does it represent to you a better fix than what was originally put in place?
It clearly does. If it had been available at that time, we would have chosen that without question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something and hopefully it clarifies and doesn't muddy the water more, but I think there's two separate issues. So when we're talking about a model and is it accurate? It might be helpful to think of it as if the real world exactly matched how our model was set up, whether it was just like assumed in the Hunt 99 or just like assumed in a three-dimensional complex heterogeneous, groundwater flow model. If the real world matched that, then your model would be exactly correct. Like the models are not inherently wrong, like they're based on the laws of physics. Where the so-called errors come in is certainly where, well, the reality doesn't always match what we model. Certainly not for an analytical solution. There's always complexities, there's three-dimensionality. So I think it's two separate conversations, like is web squared, web squared, we can't trust it because it was compared to a numerical model. Well, that's an appropriate way to evaluate a method like this. Now, would that exactly match what is happening in a real world setting? I think that's a separate question. The more complex our models get, the more closely they're going to match reality. So I do think it's two separate questions. So if we were to say, first of all, I agree web squared would be better than the half max rule. We wouldn't be able to publish half max in a peer-reviewed journal article, for example. If we were to go to a stream, a real stream then, and, do a test, would it exactly match web squared? Probably not, right? Because there's still the Hunt 99 and that probably doesn't match, exactly. So for a screening tool, I don't think it has to be, analytical solutions are wrong. They might not be appropriate for that given hydrogeologic setting. But the models are not like inherently bad or wrong. They would match reality if reality exactly matched what's in your model.
And I think that gets down to the basic question of, is the web squared model more reflective of reality than, obviously half max is, everybody hates half max, but, but is the web squared model better, a better enough reflection of reality that it is worth making a major change to the program to do this? That's, I guess that to me is kind of the crux of the question. Because we know that, no model's ever going to perfectly represent reality. But we also don't want to spend a bunch of time, bunch of money, create a bunch of uncertainty, because we're going to have more issues of Eagle going, oh, this watershed used to be in zone C, now it's in zone D. Oh, it's because we started using the web squared model at some point in time. So I mean, knowing that there is gonna be complications to adding a program like this, then the ultimate question is it more reflective of reality? And I think that's the one that we've gotta make sure that we are confident in before we try adding it to the WA tool.
So the reflecting reality, is something I've thought about a lot. How do you do that? And from when this program began, I've always been thinking about what can we do to show, are we really reflecting stream flow depletion in a way that's realistic? And from day one, that was a question that I had. It's never been answered. Now, when we came up with this, we're talking about the web squared versus what's in the tool now, half max row. I was kind of challenged, can we prove which is better? And I can't think of a way to prove it. I've not talked to anybody that can think of a way that you can prove, through field data, which is better or that. It's just, it's not something that's tractable. But what we're doing instead is the first thing that I talked about, because this will be the first time that we will have done a study where we're really looking at it, trying to understand what's happening with stream flow depletion through intensive monitoring of the stream flow, pumping, monitoring wells, as well as numerical modeling, to try to be able to tease this apart. It is not an easy problem. It's a very difficult problem. But it's one that I think that we owe it to everyone that uses this program to be able to say that we have looked at this in detail. This is what we've learned about stream flow depletion. And we can apply that to the program. It'll kind of immediately be applicable in the specific reviews. Whether it makes any change in the screen tool, I don't know. I can't predict that. I tend to think that it wouldn't, but still getting something that's better grounded in a site-specific review and tie it in with the HashDoc framework and the ability to facilitate creation of good models, I think we'll be in a much better position for this program. And I think that will answer the more fundamental question of what do we really know and understand about stream flow depletion?
Additional questions? David, were you done? Before the question?
I said everything I was gonna say,
Oh,
not necessarily the order I was gonna do.
okay. This is good. This is better than just a meeting where we check boxes, so this is good. I'll just reflect and say timelines. We're under very tight timelines for the 2024 report. We have a November meeting coming up. In an ideal world with plenty of time, we would have everything kind of in writing proposed, probably this month, and then a second chance to see if we have consensus at second month. We're down to more or less November. Report writers would kill me, but maybe if it's already written and completely ready to be included in the report, maybe a December vote. But typically we've been trying to do all last consensus gathering in November. So the charge there would be, you got a lot of work to do with a lot of people very quickly. People here will need to see things in writing a little bit before the meeting, so they have time to digest, and then we'll have to see if we can reach consensus. I will say, we should try for that. We should all try for that. The one other topic that we can, I wince to sort of say it because I feel like it's a scapegoat that we shouldn't create, but we have the ability to write reports a little bit more frequently than every 2 years. We're obligated to do one every 2 years, but if there are things here that we can't come across the line on, or as we get more and more projects implemented from the other ones, just a reminder, everybody, we can decide to do a 2025 report out of sequence. We still have to kind of do the 2026, but we can do an additional report. And I think with so many things kind of relying on implementation projects as the results come in, we may need to do that. But with all that said, thanks for really trying hard to come across the line on these. And if people have a lot of additional questions, or you're really working to figure out whether you can get to consensus on something, I encourage you to reach out to Dave or other committee members to really talk about those so that, your committee has the best shot of bringing something here that's ready to go. So don't be silent if you have a lot of unresolved questions, to talk about.
The thing I would add is, I think the implementation is critical on this, and I think that would affect our decision. And I would like to work through the Miles Committee to put together that as part of the proposal. So that we will come back with a proposal of this is part of it, but how we would implement it would be important, integral part of it.
Do you think it's feasible that you'd have that proposal written up enough in advance that we could send it out ahead of November's meeting so that people could take a look at it and be ready to reflect on it?
I hope so.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I see this implementation of replacing web or the half max with web squared. I mean, it's something as simple as that is what you're looking for. So I guess as far as a complex thing, it would be timelines and who would be going through, and I would assume there'd have to be code written or something in order to do this. Is that data already something that the department has access to, or is this something that you're going out from scratch and coming with all this new stuff?
That was the question I had, is whether there's been any beta versions of
Yeah,
matching the web system.
yeah, that's,
So sorry.
Okay.
We have the code, it's a publicly available R script that Zipper published after he had completed his work. And we were able to run the code pretty quickly, actually. It's about a 10 to 20 minute process of doing the whole thing from scratch. So we do have it in-house, and we have it available.
oh, right, right.
And so, if by information, what I'm thinking is that, again, I want to bring in these other things, so I think it should be a package.
Yeah.
And then you look at what needs to be done, so it can be done in an orderly manner and set a date and let people know. I think we need to publicize it as well, that what, why the change.
And when, and you've been saying so far that you would envision kind of, if there's consensus to have this function in the screening tool, you would envision waiting until you get the results from two of those other projects.
So it's one, it's yeah.
The Trans-Pacific
The
update.
Trans-Pacific Certificate is one. Okay.
So we need the time to finish that, review what it tells us. So it could be a year from.
I hope not, but it could be. I mean, that is really a pretty straightforward project that I hope.
Or did you have another question? Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, switching back, Conservation and Efficiency Committee.
Yes. Way shorter than that. We did not have a meeting, this month, but that does not mean we have not done anything. The good news is we will not have recommendations for this report. What we are working on is sort of some information or statements that kind of highlight the need for us to be talking about climate migration and some of the impacts that it could have on the state's water resources. We sent a very rough draft earlier, well, second rough draft out. So Frank has that, Emily has that, and a few others. We'll take a look at that, run it past our committee, and then there are no recommendations in it. It just kind of talks about the need for us to pay attention to this and why it would be important for us at the state level. I'm really waiting to see like how those 2022 funds are figured out, like how's the department going to use those and what's going to happen with those to really be able to move forward with some of that stuff. So we're in a little bit of a holding pattern with that. Simon, what did I miss?
I can jump in. I know Emily Fiddle is listening. I can refer to my supervisor first, so Emily, you want to go ahead?
I'm not seeing her.
I don't know. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm sitting in the airport terminal.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm sitting so still. I was just texting Simon. The birds are coming up to me. So I guess the other thing, Kelly, I would mention is that building on what you already highlighted in terms of the committee's conversation around climate change impacts on Great Lakes and groundwater resources. We were originally working on University of Michigan Keys master's project concept that we were planning to submit. And we were hoping to have Drew Grenold at University of Michigan be our faculty sponsor. He is going on sabbatical next year, so the timing wouldn't have worked out well for that, but we've pivoted and are now having some conversations about that project concept being more of a primary research project or potentially an integrated assessment project, where we may be able to collaborate and co-fund it through the Office of the Great Lakes and Michigan Sea Grant. They are coming up to their 2-year funding cycle, where next spring they'll be putting out a request for proposals for primary research and integrated assessment projects. And so I sit on their advisory committee. We've been talking about this project as a possible co-funded research project. And it's just spurred some good conversation with Drew and some other folks with Alliance for the Great Lakes about some opportunities to explore the same questions that we've been talking about in committee. So I don't have anything definitive at this point, other than we're having some follow-up conversations to talk about what this project might look like and whether it will be a co-funded research project with Sea Grant and Eagle, or it could be something that the Office of Great Lakes can fund directly through the Michigan Great Lakes Protection Fund. So, but it would be looking at if, some assumptions around Michigan, if we were to become a climate haven, what is the future of Michigan going to look like in terms of climate impacts on the Great Lakes and freshwater resources from a quantity standpoint? How are people going to move into the state? Where are they going to move? How are land uses going to change? How are other water sectors going to be changing in terms of either coming to Michigan or changing in the way that they're using water? And so kind of looking at all of that information and helping to do some scenario planning and help gather all this together in a way that can inform the policies and programs and tools and strategies to help us mitigate those impacts and make sure that we're prepared for what those potential changes could be. So it's a bit abstract right now, but kind of tripping off of our inspiration from Frank and the committee about how we really need to be thinking about this and what the picture may look like for Michigan.
Do you envision that if you come across the line on that as a group, are you going to pitch it as a section of your report? Is it going to be lengthy enough with supporting stuff where you want it as an appendix to the report?
I think it could be just a section of the report. I guess I would everyone in here would decide. Right now, the draft is like a page and a half.
No, it's like a small picture.
No, this is not like an entire dissertation on that. No, it is really, we're just scratching the surface on that. We've had a lot of conversations and there have been enough conversations and enough people feeling strongly about that topic that we felt that as the Water Use Advisory Council meeting, it kind of behooved us to at least mention it and start the conversation so we can point back to like, hey, we said this was important back in 2024 and then we'll build off of it in future years.
Simon, did you have anything?
I pivot to another topic that's part of our committee, unless there's any more questions on what Kelly was just talking about.
This is Frank. I just would add that I think Kelly hit it right on. That's our main thing, was to have a placeholder for this in the discussion and make sure that it was noted. And we realize it's too big a topic to try to dig into all the different parts of it, but it definitely will be having an effect on us over the coming time. And we wanted to be sure that we mentioned it. So thanks. Sorry, Simon.
Thank you, Frank. That's a good wrap up. Quick update on one of our 2020 recommendation projects. The Alliance for Water Efficiency is working on our water conservation best management practices project. It's moving along, and Katie Micah is participating in the meetings that the Alliance is having with the business and industry water sectors. The first meeting is tomorrow. If there are any members of this council that are part of this industry, it is open to you. We see in the end to get how to log in. I want to make sure that we bring to the council that this project is moving along and
Any questions?
I see none on mine.
Kelly, is that wrap it all up for them?
Yep, that's it. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, implementation committee.
All right. Well, I want to say, first of all, thank you, Jim, James, Katie, Brian, and a bunch of folks who had submitted comments on the brief draft materials that I had sent out to the committee. I did attach the most updated version to the comments from today, but understand this stuff, the draft is not going on the website because it's draft. But I am more than willing to continue taking comments and thoughts about this. Really, what I had done was just try to summarize in these sections. Here's what we recommended in 2020. Here's what's been done with the funding and the status of those recommendations. And the same thing in 2022, which is much shorter because we only just got the money. And so we basically reflect, we got the money. Thank you very much. The big question that we really need to bring to this council and get some thoughts and feedback and hopefully some consensus on, since we have quorum today, is I really need some guidance on how to write up a section on requesting ongoing funding, right? Because a lot of these projects, particularly stuff for, operations and maintenance, for monitoring wells, stream gauges, the USGS network, a lot of this other stuff is going to continue to cost money. And so there's a couple of different options and both have sort of their pros and cons, right? So if it's something that we try to say to Eagle, hey, this should be part of your normal operating budget that you request from the legislature every year, that could make the process easier of making sure that funding continues to be available on a consistent basis. But the disadvantage is that then we'd have to do a lot more coordination in terms of what do we want Eagle to ask for, and that's got to be available early enough in the year that they can include it in their budget presentation, and then we've got to make sure that it's actually in the budget proposal. And then it makes it all the way through the legislative appropriations process. The advantage to having it be a separate section of our ongoing reports is, number one, we have a lot more control over saying the specific amount that we want, what we want it for, and why, and and making that specific ask. The disadvantage being, we seem to be running on about a 2-year lag of getting any of the funding that we're requesting for. Not to say that that's going to necessarily continue, but just given past precedent. The one thing I don't want to have happen is ongoing funding needs being interrupted because the legislature isn't paying enough attention to our report to go, oh, we need this, this appropriation supplemental to deal with this, however much it is for ongoing expenses. So that's really the main question. Beyond, I've been on delegate floor at our state annual meeting, and farmers are no better than anybody else. We will argue about grammar and placement of commas and wording in sentences for hours if you don't stop us. And I know that this group could be the same way. So more so than going through, the specific sentence construction of those sections. That's really what I want to ask this group is, where do we go with making the recommendations for ongoing budget?
Laura, I think what I suggest is, first of all, we need to make sure we term things on an annual basis. So that since they appropriate on an annual basis, that we say annually we need this. And I think we should be very clear about distinction between project development versus ongoing maintenance. So all the project kind of stuff should be kind of how we're handling it now. But the ongoing, I think we should make it a very definite description of, this is how much it's going to cost to keep the Michigan hydrologic framework going. This is how much it's going to cost to keep the gauging supplement going. How much the groundwater monitoring. But once those are established, we would specifically say this is what needed. Now, should it be part of the department? Ideally, I think yes. I think the governor should be recommending that every year. But I think that we want to be able to make sure we're very clear in saying that. And that would be part of our recommendation as if the governor and the department take it as part of their thing. But that's, that gets into the old, having been in this business for a very, very long time, I can tell you that I was successful in getting an increase in Gage Network once every 10 years. That meant the other 9 years I was taking cuts.
So just like the 2022 money that we just got, it finally came forward and we're not ready to spend it yet because we're waiting on Eagle to determine how it's gonna be basically doled out, where it's gonna go, what program. So really by not having these ongoing expenses, part of Eagle's program, we're kind of at a whim anyway, as far as they find we got money, but where does that money go and where does it get allocated to first?
Okay.
So I'm with Dave that I think it should be part of Eagle's request, but I think it should almost be a separate line that says, okay, the Water Use Advisory Council, we develop it for Eagle. And say this is kind of an ask on their behalf, but it's part of their program.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. When I think about this, and our history on it, I think that if the legislature appropriates a set of money at one point in time for what, and it's referenced water council recommendations, I do think like Eagle's obligated to work with us, make sure that it's done to the way that we said, right? Because it says for water use advisory council recommendations. But you're right. I think the report, in my opinion, I think the report needs to spell out and highlight some examples of things that need ongoing annual funding. But I think by past experience, the water use advisory recommendations are not the best vehicle for an ongoing annual. That's such an integral part of, not skipping a beat and Eagle maintaining consistent operations that I think whether it's true or not, I think our reports are being more viewed as sort of one-off, occasional, like one-time discrete funding needs. And I think it will only add to hiccups, if it's put in ours. I mean, the other thing I worry about too, right, is accidentally being viewed as double dipping. So if we dig into the super details of exactly how many gauges and this and that, we put it on a financial detailed request here. We sort of have the obligation to make sure that we're not asking for money that for the exact same purposes that Eagle asked for. But if we both get them, you sort of double dip. And that can happen just pretty easily through miscommunications in an appropriation process. I think the discrete, the special projects that we propose or agree upon, those are unique. I think all of us have kind of sort of wished through time, maybe Eagle would incorporate and say, hey, for the executive budget, there's these recommendations. We got to work to see if we can get into executive budgets a little bit better in the future. But I think that's always had a challenge too. Every department only gets so many special new requests a year, and they have a lot of them internally, and asking that ours kind of go before some of theirs when they're told you can only ask for so many new things. That's a challenge. So I think also, I mean, again, on the sort of the minutia of putting a cost estimate, that really involves a lot of work working with Eagle's budget to figure out if we request an additional $1.2 million, what is it very specifically for? Is that already receiving funding? Has it received funding? I think that would be quite a bit of work. So I think my opinion would be making sure we have a section that spells out some examples of things that we strongly believe in needing ongoing funding, but probably leaving it with some sort of a mention that we believe those should be included in Eagle's proposed budgets, and not getting into like us asking for a set financial amount for reinforcing the need for them, but not doing it autonomously outside of the budget. My take.
Okay, so if we just got the 2022 funding and it says it's for 3 years, are you implying that we should put a third or something in each year and saying we still want to remind you folks that this is there or not? Okay.
No, this is for stuff that's gonna continue to cost money beyond the funding that we already got. So for instance, the stream gauges, the monitoring wells, those had a certain amount of cost to install them and to set up the software and to figure out how you're gonna pull the data from them and all that stuff. But then 5 years down the road, it's still gonna cost money to continue collecting that data as well as fixing stuff. Because things happen to monitoring wells and stream gauges out in the environment. And so the money that we got to install them is not gonna cover continuing operations and maintenance. And that's what I'm talking about, is those ongoing expenses that aren't included in the initial, like, it's gonna cost us this much to develop a model, and once the model is developed, then we're done spending money on it. This is stuff that's gonna keep costing money down the road that we haven't accounted for, but once they're built, boy, that's sure a big waste if we don't have the funding to be able to continue gathering information from actual installed infrastructure that we put out in the countryside.
But you're saying it's incumbent upon us to make that recognition?
That's what I'm asking.
Can we trust Eagle to do it? I'm not saying we don't trust them, but you had a 2022 recommendation, nobody carried the water for that. I think people were thinking perhaps, and I'm just kind of getting into this, but thinking that the Eagle people were gonna carry the water for us, they didn't. Was that one of the issues, trying to make sure that they're aware of ongoing expenses?
You will be lobbying, so. Well.
Well, they can make a budget for
A budget.
But
Make a budget.
it's part of this committee to
Well-
push for that funding.
Well, and I guess I would say too, Adam, Jim, James, I know, you were on earlier, I don't know if you still are. I mean, are there thoughts that you guys have? What's helpful to you for us to include in a report, or to say, hey, Eagle, please, we're gonna count on you to include this in your annual budget because you've already put the stuff out there.
I've been
What
thinking a
do we
lot
wanna do
about
here?
this. Appreciate you bringing it up, thinking a lot about this. The work that you all have done and the pots of money and the discrete projects, as you say, were real needs in the 2020 and the 2022. And so we're gonna be busy the next several years working on that. And we've been tasked with leadership to make sure that these things are all building together to, a common endpoint, which is sort of bigger altruistic goals of where we want to be in 10, 20 years. The groundwater PFC that we have, again, the database coming online, the Michigan Hydrologic Framework, all these things, the fuse has been lit on all these things and coming to fruition. But that was kind of the fear in the back of my mind, is like, we're finally in a place where we're stepping forward and developing this giant database, this framework and a robust monitoring network, and it's gonna cost money on an ongoing basis. And you hate to go backwards when you have all the pieces and parts in place. So I'm happy that you're having that discussion, and I think it's right to think about these discrete needs. They're very helpful, but yeah, I mean, in maintaining a stream gauge network and a monitoring network, those are things that you can kind of put a price on, thumbnail, and make sure that you got a certain level of service going forward that continues to add the data that we need into priority areas, getting it into the database and be available for use how we all envisioned it.
And I think it's really important for us to always have our voice supporting it. Data collection is the worst thing to get funded. I mean, the legislature usually they don't get it at all.
Right? We paid for the stream gauge. Why are you still asking for money on it?
It's always a crisis. And then that's why every 10 years I get money, because there'd be a crisis, so then they put money up. But I think, again, I think we have power in our collective voice because of who we represent and how we speak in unity, that if we can keep doing that, it'll help, I think, the department. That's at least how I think we need to be able to operate. We need to rely on the department budget and the governor's support for a certain amount of maintaining the infrastructure that we call for. But we need to be the independent voice that is lobbying, pushing for, making sure it's highlighted.
Practically speaking, from a program perspective, so if the council says, ask for 5 million in your report, throw a number, 5 million, and here's A, B, and C you want done. as part of that. Then the legislature, and we find out, okay, the legislature gave us $5 million. We are gonna have to figure out, okay, so for example, string gauges. We get a cost for how much it costs to install a gauge. There's also, we get a cost for annual operation and maintenance for that gauge, so we've got to figure out, all right, how many gauges is that gonna pay for, and how many years of operation and maintenance is that gonna pay for? We get a pot of money for the MHF. Okay, here's a upfront cost, but there's gonna be an O&M cost, so we need to know when Dave writes up this recommendation, how much do you need annually for O&M? And know that.
And that was in the proposal.
Yeah.
So it was there. Recognition of that.
And Sarah, I want to make sure and wrap you in on this conversation as well, because our 2020 and 2022 reports also included the Michigan Geological Survey work, which the legislature tends to fund separately from the Water Use Advisory Council recommendations. I mean, but both times now that they've provided funding on an ongoing basis, it's been in separate line items. You know, Michigan Geological Survey gets the money that for the groundwater, or excuse me, the mapping that they're doing, and then here's this pot of money for Water Use Advisory Council recommendations. Sarah, can you weigh in on kind of what your feeling is in terms of this report, including a request for ongoing funding for that mapping effort?
I think that's critical. We do need that funding, and we are providing support. You know, not only is it the mapping, but we need to map the aquifers as well. And so I need some additional, support for that. And the concept of, putting in data loggers. We're doing this in conjunction with Allegan County, and we're going to fund it for the first year and then hand it off to them. What about counties that can't do that? We also need the funding for that, and it coincides with the mapping because it helps give the aquifer characteristics.
I think Sarah's representing what is a state agency. So I mean, I think we're dealing with the same thing. She's under the same budget process. I think that some of that money, I think, has been built into, it's kind of the expectation that they're gonna get that. We need to be careful that we don't double dip. I think we need to be very clear. We support this money from the Michigan Geological Survey. If Michigan Geological Survey needs other things, I think they need to get the specific requests and we can support it, or it may be expanded network. We can say, we would like to just expand it and ask for money to do that, but then it's gonna have to default over to them, and we can support O&M for that expansion.
The other thing that we've been successful in doing with MGS, because these ongoing appropriations for the survey come through our shop, and we've been successful in having the university sort of view that as base funding flow through and not akin to a grant where you attach 45-50% overhead to that. Sensitive subject, obviously, for research institution, but that's worked so far. That coming through, realizing that the state survey is quasi-governmental agency. It used to be part of us, located at it is part of Western, but it's also its own entity, and that funding flowing through our shop has been viewed as just that, base funding, and the departments through boilerplate and through our management of those grants made sure that it was still being used where it was intended.
I think you got your hand up.
Yeah, this is Frank. And I just wanted to say that I really support the idea of having us in our report, maybe not ask for specific money for this project, but rather give strong support for the critical nature of this work and the fact that the money needs to be appropriated for this. I think coming from us, that's really important because we're going to be using the information that comes out of this. And I think it's really important for us to do that. And I know, and when I speak for United Tribes has passed resolutions supporting this funding as well. And although we're not funded and nothing comes through us, we're definitely in support of it because we want to work to protect the water. We think that this work that they're doing is really good for the state and for all of us. So thanks.
I would just add too that some of this is about the data and that long-term planning initiative that we're working on will hopefully set us up better. So we talk about what's already being done at what level, where we need certain amounts, how much they'll cost to install, to maintain. I imagine we're gonna talk about, what is critical minimum levels, what is the preferred levels, and dig into each of the different types of data. And really, when I've mentioned, like, I'm hoping that provides the very robust, super well justified mix for future requests. Hopefully that will clear up a little bit by the next report. We'll be able to really lay out ongoing versus installation, one time versus ongoing for all the different types of data. It might not include the hydrologic framework, but it will hopefully set us up better on this.
Okay, so let me see if I can summarize what I'm hearing and ask for consensus on this. I'm hearing we definitely want a section in our report that calls for continued funding for projects that have ongoing expenses, that we do kind of a high level, like, set amount of, here's the amount of money we think it's gonna take for ongoing expenses on an annual basis. Strongly urge the legislature, work with Eagle and appropriate this amount, but not dig too far into and these are the exact line items and accounts and all this kind of stuff that this is going to be spent under, because Eagle's going to do that as part of their annual budget process.
I think we need to be careful with that. So, for example, if we're saying that we want to fund this expansion of the stream gauging network, there's a dollar amount that goes with that. And if you want that to happen, I think you need to be clear that that's what it's for. As opposed to, all of a sudden, it's $5 million. Eagle says, well, my priority's over here, in air, or wherever. We need to be very clear about where we.
Yeah, I guess when I say high level, I mean, we want this amount of money on an annual basis to fund operations and maintenance for stream gauges. We
Yes.
want this amount of money on an ongoing basis to pay USGS for their thing, like we're gonna list out the topics, but not like down in the weeds the way that Eagle's budget will go, on a line by line account style.
If that's what you're saying. I
Yes,
think that's exactly what.
okay. Are there any objections to that? Because what we'll do is if everybody's got consensus that that's what we want to do on the report, I'll draft up a version, circulate it around to implementation for a quick pass, and then send it out to the committee, kind of like we did with the draft of the 2020 and 2022 sections. Everybody can take a look at it before November's meeting. Just to try to keep the report moving so that we're not in this huge, 12-hour slog of reviewing the entire report at once. That's why I'm kind of trying to do this piecemeal. But if everybody's good with that and no objections, we'll go ahead and draft that up and send it around for everybody's thoughts. Okay,
That sounds good.
all right.
I don't see any other hands raised. Oh, go ahead.
Real quick. The Word documents that have been posted in the chat, I'm not able to access them. I don't know if it's just a me problem, but it's blocking me and saying I'm not a user or something like that. So if those could just be sent via email.
Yep, sure will. I'll work with Bree and we'll get actually, what may be most useful is, because the version that I posted out today isn't that much different than the one that already went out. Maybe the best option would be to go ahead and write up that section for continuing funding and send the whole thing out by
That's fine
email,
too.
if that works. Okay. Yeah, because mainly what's changed is just, wordsmithing, for the newest versions that went out today.
So then can I skip over the next set of slides that are the narrative? for
Yes.
the-
Yes, please do. Look at all that text. Off your guys' plate.
Awesome.
It's all you.
Thank you. All right, and now we're on to item 7. We've got Adam Zwickel here to present his work on the Water Users Committee. we've had a few, discussions on this kind of as an update, but, Adam hasn't had the opportunity to be here to present, so, we've given, hopefully enough time to have full discussion on this, and, so with that, I'll hand it over to Adam.
Great, perfect. Thanks, Pat. I'm Adam Zwickel, Associate Professor from the Department of Community Sustainability and the Environment and Science Policy Program at Michigan State University, representing the project team for building capacity for collaborative water management. And Jim, I made you click a whole bunch of slides so you could advance. The original proposal title is a nice academic-y phrase, building capacity for collaborative governance through a participatory modeling approach. That was what we submitted. And that was jointly funded by Eagle and Seagrid. And so our project, as we submitted as with 5 total project goals, we ultimately completed 4 of them. So our goals were to learn the current barriers associated with the convening of a water user committee, or WUC, as we called it, since we used that term 1,000 times. Determine what is needed to overcome those barriers, and then understand what information, tools, and strategies are needed for a water user committee to reach an agreement for sustainable collective water use, and what is the best process for using those resources to reach an agreement. And then communicate all of that information in a broadly accessible water user committee guide. This was our main deliverable. And then pilot the effectiveness of this guide by convening 2 to 3 pilot water user committees using the developed guide, which that was the one project goal we did not achieve. We were unable to pilot that in a group setting, and I'll talk more about that moving forward. So just a brief overview of what the timeline looked like. Immediately after getting funded, we assembled a stakeholder advisory board and a leadership team. So our stakeholder advisory board, we strove to make up a diverse set of stakeholders representing the entire range of large quantity water users in the state. And throughout the project, we had numerous meetings and individual one-on-one discussions with the stakeholder advisory board. We also had a leadership team comprised of members from Eagle, the Water Use Assessment Program, Office of Great Lakes, MDARD, and DNR to really make sure we were getting input from the legal and state side of that. Our first set of data collection was a water user survey that went out in fall of 2022 that was sent to all large quantity water users throughout the state. Actually, if you could back up for just a second, Jim, and then I'll get into that. And then I reported those results here that I'll go over for a second. Then we did some focus groups in the spring of 23, and then those were our main data collection opportunities. We focused on writing the guide through the summer and starting in 23, and then we tried to convene some participatory case studies beginning in the fall of last year and culminating in the spring. But like I said, despite repeated attempts, we were ultimately unable to convene those, but I'll talk about that more moving forward. So I'm going to go through each of these real quick and then deliver our final conclusions and recommendations. So go ahead, Jim. So I presented this earlier, almost exactly a year ago today, our water user survey that we went out in 2022. We sent out in 2 waves. The first to those who report to MDARD, those who report their water use to MDARD, and then those who report to Eagle, so ag and non-ag large quantity water users. We had a very good response rate for an electronic survey. That was delightful. So we got good participation, good diverse data there. So I'll just briefly hit on a couple of the key highlights. If you want more, again, you can go and look at the WUAG presentation from last year. So one of the main findings is that the vast majority of water users in the state do not know what zone they're in. And this is a fundamental component of understanding where a water user sits in relation to Michigan water law. So there's a lack of knowledge about that. Next slide. Yep.
So that was a survey of all users?
Correct. It was sent out to all high capacity, large quantity water users.
What percentage response?
Roughly 30% for both ag and non-ag.
Right, thank you.
Overall, we found there's limited knowledge of Michigan water law in general, and water user committees specifically, which is not a big surprise. The large water user committee is unfamiliar with water user large water user community is unfamiliar with water user committees or the legal, requirements for them. So in a situation like this, where there's low levels of awareness, we can draw from research into risk communication and risk mitigation that tells us that what kind of information motivates people changes. It depends on the level of knowledge that they have. So folks with low levels of awareness are termed pre-contemplative by us scientists, which means they have not yet begun to think about this issue. And importantly, those folks are motivated by information that focuses on vulnerability. So is this a problem? Does it affect me? As opposed to, are water user committees a solution for this problem? So our recommendations were, before introducing water user committees as an opportunity, first, the communication needs to focus on whether or not this is a challenge. And this is contrasted with people who define themselves as more knowledgeable. As people in general gain knowledge, they become more motivated by information focusing on efficacy. So will this water user committee reduce my risk? Will this solution, approach be a solution? So we've written these water user committee guides with this sort of principle in mind, focusing first on where and when a water user committee might be needed, and then second, how it can be used to help in those instances. So another major finding that we found from the survey was that there was low trust in the state. So it's a question where 20% of users reported having no trust at all in the state to manage water. And ag users reported lower levels of trust than non-ag users at a level that was statistically significant. And so trust is a reoccurring theme in this presentation. This is a major issue here. So other main takeaways, next slide, please, is water users do care about water quantity. They are concerned about that, but not as much as they are concerned about water quality or issues of government overreach. These were the top 3 answers for when water users were asked, what are the major risks facing you today? And then finally, there's a widespread perception that water is abundant. It's not very threatened. And this perception of abundance has real implications for collaboration, and I'll talk more about that. So those are the greatest hits from the survey in 2022. We followed that up with focus groups where we gathered different stakeholders in 2 different sessions, one in person, one online. These participants included members of our stakeholder advisory board, plus other scientists, groundwater modeler, and extension representative. And we started with a general discussion, and one thing that arose were issues of communication, specifically behind how site-specific reviews, zone C and D classifications, and water users in general are communicated to water users. Water user committee, yes, are communicated to water users. And the main thing that arose was that this was very confusing. The letters that are sent out to water users are hard to understand, and folks are unclear as how best to proceed. And really that confusion leads to a pretty quick breakdown in trust. The other activity that we did in our focus groups was a participatory modeling exercise, which this participatory modeling seeks to highlight connections between different elements of a broader system. And they create flow diagrams like this that I don't expect you to read the words on, but really it highlights how different things are connected. And some of the main connections that came up in our discussions were connections between water quantity and water quality. And so while water user committees are just focused at water quantity, that is often not the case for actual water users. These ideas are more.
Excuse me, the connection is what?
In some instances, the state water quantity can lead to water quality issues. Okay. In other instances, water quality can be a driving factor or a main risk, but it's not what's of concern for the water user communities.
And that's based on your perception of the participants.
Yes, yes, exactly. But yeah, we're focus groups. And these focus groups were helpful for deciding, building on the information we got from the survey, but deciding what we should be including in our guide, where is information needed, what information is helpful. And so next slide, that led us to, again, our main deliverable for this project, which was our water user committee guide. So we received numerous rounds of iterative feedback, not only from our stakeholder advisory board, from our leadership team, but from individuals that we contacted. And one of the earlier pieces of feedback from our stakeholder advisory board discussions were that we actually needed to have multiple guides. And that throughout this process, there are different hats that people must wear. There are different skill sets that are required. And so we actually had 3 different guides to focus on those. So the first guide we convened was a convener guide. And that person is responsible for assembling a group of water users. So that the old adage from community participatory decision-making is that just getting all the right people in the room is 75% of the work. I would say from the challenges that we faced, it's at least that, if not more. So the convener guide is really focused on somebody who has local information, has a local historical knowledge of issues that are there, and has connections with water users in the area. The second was a facilitator guide, and that guide was written for a skilled facilitator, somebody who has training in being a facilitator, leading a group through a contentious issue, because it's clear that a water user committee will require a skilled facilitator. So that focused more on process and leading a group to a decision that is acceptable to both the water users, but also to Eagle. And then finally, there's the participant guide, which is the guide that we originally thought we'd be writing from the beginning. And we wrote this guide for large quantity water users and representatives of local government. These are the people that are named specifically in the law, and so those were our intended audiences for this guide. And we focused on a balance of content, so information regarding Michigan water policy, the hydrological cycle, and the role of water user committees, and process, surfacing individual values and goals, determining what expertise and tools are needed to come to a decision, and then coming up with possible options. So it's important for me to state very clearly that we do not think that these guides are or should be set in stone. There are going to be future updates to these guides needed as the landscape around water user committees evolves and becomes more defined. These were the best possible product that our research team could come up with, given the amount of uncertainty surrounding water user committees in general, and that we believe they should be used as foundation for future conversations focused on how to improve sustainable local water management moving forward. After following the creation of these guides and getting a few rounds of early feedback, next slide, please. Our next step was to try and convene participatory case studies, which we did primarily in the beginning of this year. We worked with our leadership team to identify 2 water management areas that were chosen and collaborated to choose those. And we worked through local extension agents to help establish initial meetings with water users in these areas. But both of these groups that we worked with eventually declined to participate, and they both offered various criteria that they would be willing to participate if these criteria were met. But it's important to state here that anyone can decide to not participate in our research at any time without penalty. As a researcher at Michigan State University, we have an institutional review board overlooking ethical research that prohibits me and my research team from reaching out and contacting after people have opted out of of participating in our program. So we couldn't be engaged in a back and forth. We couldn't sort of negotiate for people's participation in our research. That's simply not allowed. So while there likely could have been more fruitful conversations had we sort of engaged with these groups further, we were not able to do that. So because we weren't able to get to get a group feedback, because we weren't able to test our guide through a group feedback, we've been reaching out with individual water users to make sure that this is at least getting vetted through the people who will be using these again. So while we didn't get the opportunity to test out our process for navigating a water user committee with actual water users in a great group setting, in the act of trying, we daylighted issues that need to be addressed for convening even a water user case study as possible. So this leads us to our final conclusions. And I'll start with the barriers that we found, some of which we have eloquently expressed today. So number one is a lack of clarity surrounding the regulatory process in general and what role water user committees can play in helping water users. For example, who is required and who can be part of a water user committee process? This is not clear, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The second is a limited understanding of how the water withdrawal assessment tool works. I think this is very fitting given our conversation, and how it's used to make water set determinations and when data is collected to verify it. Our conversations with water users were almost completely dominated with frustrations expressed towards the water withdrawal assessment tool and the lack of data demonstrating a decline of available water. So there is a void of information regarding the water withdrawal assessment tool, which has led to a great deal of confusion and misinformation. And from within this void, other prominent voices have emerged that, in the opinion of our research team, are not in the best interest of Michigan water users and have deliberately complicated the process. So there is a need for clear communication in this area. When I hear discussion of rolling out, possible changes to the water withdrawal assessment tool, I agree with you in that implementation, that communication process is going to be vital, should be handled very carefully. Next, currently, there is no incentive to participating in a water user committee, just the avoidance of possible negative outcomes. And these possible negative outcomes, be they litigation or reducing withdrawals, have successfully been avoided for almost over a decade by just ignoring the problem and maintaining status quo. So there needs to be a clear incentive for people to collaborate right now. And then finally, there's no precedent or guidelines for what constitutes an acceptable water user committee agreement. And this leaves water users sort of being felt like they're expected to figure this out. So in the absence of a rubric or an acceptable water user committee agreement, there's a lot of confusion about and trepidation about suggesting these ideas. So there is a desire by Eagle to allow these agreements to emerge creatively by water users and through a process of trial and error, establish a set of acceptable practices through precedent. In our opinion, this process, however, requires greater levels of trust and goodwill towards the state that currently exists. Water users are fearful of putting forth suggestions because they're unsure what the ramifications of those suggestions will ultimately be. So there's a real chicken and an egg problem. So all of these conclusions, all of these barriers, if you go back one, all of these barriers contribute to an overall lack of trust in Eagle. And this is the number one problem that we encounter time and again throughout our project. Until there's clarity on all of the issues on the previous slide, the trust and the buy-in among water users simply isn't going to be there to come together and discuss water use at this time. So related to that, the next slide is that water users do not currently believe there's a problem worth addressing. So scarcity is a key driver in collaborative natural resource management. We know this very clearly from the research. And research tells us that if there's too little scarcity, so people perceive that there's plenty of water to go around, or if there's too much scarcity, it's critical and everyone has to fight over the water, that becomes a barrier to collaboration. So there's really a sweet spot where there's a little bit of scarcity, and so people are comfortable and motivated to work together. So to make that sweet spot bigger, there needs to be both a clear need and a benefit for participating. And for areas in the United States that have had successful collaborative water management, where they have not been faced with extreme drought that we see farther west, there have been greater levels of trust. So again, it comes down to building trust. And so that leads us to our recommendations. Next slide, please. Number one is better communication with water users. And this can and should take the form of several different forms. So starting with a very basic, what zone is a water user in? So we believe that this little zone classification is actually an important conversation starter. This is where people begin to interface with the water control assessment tool, with water user committees in general, site-specific reviews. It all starts with a zone classification. But being clear about how that is determined, and then also the reasoning behind water user committees. And so key to all of this is to be available for EGLE to be available to answer questions. And we mean that beyond just a simple phone number on a website, which is a passive form of communication. As a quick example, Andy LeBaron attended one meeting and made himself available to the criticisms and the complaints, but also the questions and the misinformation. After Andy left, we heard from water users unanimously that was very well appreciated. So we understand that takes time and resources from water use assessment personnel and EGLE people, but that I think is a really key first step in rebuilding these relationships that have been broken down and correcting a lot of the misinformation that's out there and clearing up the confusion. And we wrote these guides to assist in that communication process. So again, these guides are a passive form of communication. They are not a magic bullet that's going to solve all the problems, but we did design them in a way that they are conversation starters. They can get that conversation started. Next slide. There needs to be resources to both support the convening and the facilitation of a water user committee. This is a very big time and organizational undertaking. Law, the regulations, the data are all very complex. And it's not something that most water users can pick up on the side when they are focused on their day-to-day job. So resources should take on several different forms, but local water data, maps that show boundaries and well locations and stream locations, but also funding for facilitators or a list of facilitators that groups can decide on their own would all be necessary. Another recommendation is to clearly define who is required to be in a water user committee and who can be part of a water user committee. So who is part of the negotiating process and who can be there as sources of information. So in trying to form our case study groups, we followed what was literally the letter of the law and limited our initial meeting to registered large capacity water users and representatives of local. This was an unpopular opinion, and water users resented not being able to bring their consultants and their trusted experts to the meeting. And so the process that we laid out in the guide includes a step early on in the process after the group is formed to decide collectively what expertise is needed and who to bring in. We chose that format based on research in the group decision-making literature that shows that limiting the formulation of the problem to just the direct stakeholders increases both the creativity of the resulting solutions and also group member satisfactions with those solutions. But we never got to that point because frankly, the water users didn't trust us. And we were telling them that the initial meeting needed to be limited to just water. And so that needs to be clearly defined. And so that's our recommendations for that, because this was one point that led, this is one of the points that led to our case studies, deciding not to participate. And then second to last one, define the criteria by which water user committee agreements will be judged. I sort of already mentioned this. Develop a set of acceptable and unacceptable practices. So there needs to be some sort of boundaries for people at least to understand where a conversation can begin. In our conversation with the leadership team, there was discussion around this idea of preventative measures. Maybe can play a role here, but everyone was pretty unsure about what to do with that. So perhaps that is a place where the conversation can start. But that needs to be laid out ahead of time. So at least the group knows what is the boundaries of what's within the realm of feasibility. And then finally, this was an issue that came up in one of our meetings with water users, but next slide, please. Lay out issues of enforcement. Determines what happens when a water user committee agreement is accepted but not upheld. Determining who is responsible for monitoring that agreement and defining conditions under which that agreement can or must be revisited. There's none of those things are in place right now, and that was an issue of concern that came up. So hopefully I've left time for questions. Just the final slide there to say thank you to the Water User Advisory Council. Many of you donated your time and perspective to this project, and it was our task to make sure that your input was reflected in our work. So I do hope that it was. And then thank you for Eagle and Office of Great Lakes and Sea Grant for funding this work. And so now I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Adam. Does anybody have any questions? Sure.
I wanted to get some perspective, and you've talked about this briefly before, but now that you're kind of wrapping the project up, I wanted to get some perspective of you on your thoughts about when you're trying to work with a water user or a committee, the expectation of the level of data and, in terms of impacts, what the status of the watershed is, what the concern is, in terms of, hey, there's this user that can't get in, and how do we come up with a solution on that? Sort of what should Eagle be bringing to the table, and what's the expectation of the users to bring to the table?
Yes, this will surprise people, but I think there is agreement on that's the same thing. I think there's a clear expectation and a desire, at least in from our interactions with Eagle, that if there is a water user committee that's being convened, it is because there has been a zone D classification or something that's put in there, and there's been a site-specific review, and there's data demonstrating a decline in available water. I think I've said that I think that's as clear as I can make. Mm-hmm. Both water users want to demonstrate that they want data demonstrating that there's an issue, and Eagle has said that they would demonstrate that there is an issue through review and available data.
Mm-hmm. And then from the perspective of the folks who are in the water user committee, is there an expectation of the information or data that they need to be bringing to the table, or that is needed for the consideration?
Okay, I see. Yeah. I would say our project doesn't have data that specifically talks to that. Okay. In general, we would advise that it is not incumbent upon an individual water user to be providing their own data. Okay. Unless they're rebutting sort of what they're arguing, they're rebutting what Eagle is presenting.
Okay.
But we never got to any of those cases.
Right.
Adam, I find this fascinating because we talk about the science of water and we're dealing with the science of people. And it's totally different, but it is almost more challenging than dealing with trying to get our arms around the science of water. So I applaud you for your work on this. And I guess I'm going to make you king of the state for a day. And if you were, would this be the process that you build into the legislation for coming up with a solution to water conflict? Or do you think that the solution in itself is are we faced with an impossible task? So That may be more than you're prepared to answer today, but
No.
I'd love to get your perspective after you've been through the fire.
That's a wonderful question. So you mean the solution, meaning water user?
Yes, yes.
So I appreciate it. No, I do believe that it is a good solution and I am happy to explain why. So I am a scientist, a social scientist that focuses on people, yes. But I'm a scientist that looks at data. And the data is very clear that when it comes to natural resource management, whether it's water or forests or fish or whatever, and any kind of government system, whether it's in the United States or at the state level, at the federal level, or in another country, that natural resource management is, in general, more sustainable when decisions are made at a more local level. And so, therefore, as a scientist who studies sustainable natural resource management, I am in favor of empowering local users to have a greater say in the management of their resource. And so I do think that there are examples in the United States where a process very similar to the water user committees has worked very, very well. And I think there is great potential here. But I think the pieces are not here yet in Michigan. If I could go one step further, I would say a personal interest of mine, I mentioned that sort of sweet spot of where there needs to be a scarcity of a resource to encourage collaborative management, which is sustainable management. I hate the fact that it takes everyone a crisis, and this is human nature, a crisis to then sort of plan sustainably. And so a motivation of mine personally is to get people to think farther ahead and act more sustainably before something becomes imperiled. That's very frustrating because the research clearly shows that people don't like to do that. They have other pressing crises to worry about. It's human nature. And so I think water user committees could be a very fruitful place where we can expand that sweet spot of collaborative governance, and we can get partnerships between water users and the state.
Frank had a question online. Go ahead, Frank.
Yes, hi, Adam. I appreciate your report today, and I did participate in some of the meetings and part of the process. And one of the things that we talked about during the process was like who would handle the meetings, how would that be done? And at our last council meeting here, I had suggested that we work with or contact the Michigan Community Mediation Association. I worked with a local person here in the Emmett County area who's part of the Northern Michigan Mediation Center. And I've sent the contact information to all of the council members by email during this meeting. I realized I was supposed to send it before the meeting, my apologies, but it's just a contact. And there are, but I wanted to, that's one of the things that I thought that we needed is that when you talk about the question of trust, you need to have a neutral person that's actually running or not necessarily convening the meeting, but being able to be in the process, to be facilitating that process. And so this was one suggestion, and it was I didn't get a chance to get it to you as part of this process, but it was one that I wanted to just tell you that I've suggested to other council members as one of the possible ways of how these might work. I've been somewhat skeptical, although I do appreciate your comments about the stronger decision making being locally made, and I like that idea, and I think that is a strong point for this. I did, however, and still somewhat share that the questioner, I didn't see who asked that question about would you have done it this way, and did they set us up for an impossible task? We won't know until it actually happens, but I do appreciate all the work you put into this and the report you've given, and I think the guides will be really helpful for when this process actually has to be implemented. Thank you.
I've got two questions. One coming at it from the point of view of when this came out of the legislature, I'm not sure anybody actually knows how. I was part of the process, but I never heard from anybody saying definitively this is why they did it. My assumption is that a lot of other water law directly goes to a judge, a county district. And that's the resolution. And so I think they were trying to avoid that. And I think that's a good thing, but it's not a very well-defined process. But did you find that any understanding on parts of users that they do have a legal possible solution going to court? And do they view that as a positive thing or a negative thing that would encourage them to use this as an alternative?
Sorry, can you repeat that first part? I didn't quite hear.
Yeah, so that, is there an understanding on the part of potential water users in this committee that there is a legal process that they could potentially use going to court? Although that's not defined in the statute either, but that ultimately is how you resolve statutory disputes. And would they view this as potentially a better way of going? And I guess maybe the way to ask it is that, would they view the potential going to court as a threat that they'd rather work this, or they're not even thinking of that as a possibility?
Yeah, so I don't have clear data. I don't have data to clearly answer that, but I can give you my sense. So, we talked about in our conversations with water users, when we were introducing this idea, trying to explain the whole concept. We framed it partially as a way to avoid litigation. And that was very well received by everyone. I certainly can't speak for all water users with this comment, but in the conversations we had regarding litigation, people were nervous about going to court because not only is that expensive, but it's also not a guaranteed outcome. And so I think I would just leave it at that. I do agree with the first part of your comment and that this was in our understanding, talking to other folks, this was intended as a way to reduce all water conflicts going to courts.
My other question deals with the scarcity issue, because this program, or this process of program is designed to not ever let the water get to that point. You should never see fish dying because there's not enough water. You should never close to that. And that's kind of the thing that people think of. And if you look at Western situation, it's an entirely different situation. And streams have been dried up and destroyed and so on. And so this is actually providing a high level of protection on a stream. But it's really hard to demonstrate there's scarcity when your level resource protection is so high.
Yes, that is an excellent point. In this context, there's essentially legislated scarcity, where now water becomes unavailable because we are protecting the resource from becoming too scarce. And from a scientific standpoint, that hasn't been looked at in the legislation, in the literature, and actually I find that very interesting. That's not helpful here. But yes, the fact that the water withdrawal assessment tool is a very conservative screener and everything is designed to prevent an ARI, you're exactly right. And sometimes that makes conversations difficult because we try to in the guides, we sort of phrase it as a warning light on your car, on your dashboard. And that if the check oil light comes on, it's supposed to come on before there's a big problem. You can address that. And then you can maybe switch it off or whatever. But that does make the issue it makes it more complicated. It makes it more complicated to communicate, and it makes it, a bit of a tougher pill to swallow as a water user because you're working to avoid something before it happens and it hasn't happened.
I guess the third point that I would make is that with the system set up is that what is measurable is how much is being pumped. So the decision as to whether an area is happening is directly related to that. And exactly how that's demonstrated is another matter, but it all comes back to how much water is being pumped. And that this amount of pumping is going to be too much. And so I think it's designed to fall back on something that is measurable, but there's still built into it things that are going to look an awful lot like a black box to the user, because the push is going to be, the system says you're an ARI, they don't see a problem there, right? But the ARI is caused because they want to pump more water.
Yes, and I completely agree. And to make the black box even blacker, the ARI is tied back to charismatic fish or characteristic fish populations. And in some of these streams, there's no fish. It's a drainage ditch. And so to explain, okay, well, yes, there's no fish in this drainage ditch. Yet we still need to protect these fish. It gets even more complicated. We understand at a macro level why that all, the necessary reasons for all that, but it is make a challenge.
Quick little one, drainage ditch with our legal designation and almost every single one has fish.
Oh,
We've got big trout dials,
Yeah.
legal drains.
Thank you for
That were
that.
rivers
Correct.
long before the drain code. I was gonna actually ask a question that, the role of Eagle in the future of this. You've kind of laid forth that, there's probably some trust issues. Or
There
definitely
is, there
is
are trust issues. yeah.
Are trust issues. But it also seems like, and Frank's hit on like, who may be able to serve as mediator? This seems to me to be an elective mediation function, short of legal stuff, but Eagle's the enforcement agency for this. So if there's more communications about like why people should choose or would want to assess whether they choose elective mediation with each other to identify a solution. They obviously have various legal venues, right? They can either challenge each other for entry, or they can try to, collect information and rebut a presumption that's there.
Correct.
Eagle seems, no offense, but in a rough position to be the spokesperson and communicator for like drawing people to choose elective mediation.
Yeah.
So in your assessment, like, are there some other entities, if we're ever trying to, really forward this and get it, thought of differently and chosen as a possibility in certain situations, is it, extension? Is it the industry themselves, like, versus Eagle? I'm kind of grappling with, if we were trying to forward it later, what's the right entity to do some of this communication and drawing the community towards this?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I guess I haven't been as empathetic towards Eagle as you have in that comment to think about this. Eagle is in a tough spot here as the regulator and the communicator. I strongly believe that Eagle still needs to communicate. They need to be out there and available. I also believe that it shouldn't just be, so extension absolutely is an obvious choice for me. But also, also industry groups, because I do believe this is in the best interest of water users, especially when it comes to avoiding litigation, as we were talking about. And so, as sort of leadership filters up to commodity groups or industry groups, like, I would hope that they could see the benefit to their constituents in this approach. But I do think it's very important that Eagle also does communicate. So to me, you mentioned Frank's comment about a mediator. It's a very big difference between mediating and communicating, and I know you weren't suggesting that there wasn't. A mediator or a facilitator should be neutral. And Eagle, I think, in a perfect world, it's not my budget, should be making resources available for people to select a facilitator. Perhaps Eagle has a coordinator that is working with extension folks, helping find conveners, as we identified them, to bring together water user committees, because that requires a lot of, Andy well knows this, it requires a lot of in-depth knowledge of the policy and all that sort of stuff that someone outside of Eagle is hard pressed to find. So I could see Eagle having a water user committee coordinator position that works with local conveners, explains what the heck these are all about, helps them, empowers them to, bring folks together, and then connects them with, for example, a facilitation network like Frank mentioned. I think this would be a valuable role for Eagle to do that would be within their purview. But of course, I'm not handling their budget.
And I've got a couple of questions. First, the 3 guides, are they going to be available?
Absolutely, yeah.
And how can we get them?
So they're still going through, one of them is no, that's not true. They're still going through the very fine, we have our final drafts that are going through individuals right now. Once they're finalized, we will make them available. Yeah, to both the funding agencies as well as the water user advisory council, for sure.
Okay. And then the second question deals with more of the mechanics of the facilitation of some of these meetings that were held. Whereas I have some level of training in facilitation. So by no means am I suggesting that I would be suitable to facilitate this. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But
Wise man.
it takes a very specialized skill set. MSU Extension has very skilled trained facilitators, but not every MSU Extension agent is qualified to act as a facilitator. The facilitation sessions that I've been in, one of the keys to success, in my opinion, is establishing ground rules up front. That you get buy-in from everybody in the group about how that is going to be conducted. And if there's an issue comes up, the facilitator pulls the individuals aside and has to talk with them, brings them back to the group. Was that done for these meetings?
No, so I would say we had sort of informational meetings. We never had an official water user committee meeting. And so we didn't have a facilitative hat on, I would say, when we ran these. And so we didn't have established. I think I would leave it at that.
Yeah, can I follow up on this? So, I realize that you're wrapping up this project and we gotta move on. But I'd hate to see these just collect dust for another 10 years until the water user committee comes along. So I think there's some people around the table that would be willing to put some more effort into this to try to game test this, do a tabletop. And I'm curious on what your thoughts on that, because it is tough to get people to the point where they have that scarcity and they really need that need, but then we also need to kind of test this out to see if some of these methods and the process and the data is going to be effective. So do you have any thoughts on maybe this group creating a committee or a work group to try to suss that out a little bit? Or I guess it's kind of an open question.
Yeah. I'm in the exact same mindset essentially. I would leave that up to LUAC to determine sort of where you are going to go, but my thoughts are exactly the same. I think, as I said, we did the best we could with the amount of uncertainty that we had. And while we have had individuals go through the guides and the process, and while we built our process upon sort of the best science that we could draw from, it hasn't been tested in a group dynamic. So I think the easiest place to start would be sort of a hypothetical tabletop exercise. And the less hypothetical it could be, the better the outcome would be. More realistic test it. Absolutely.
Right. We've got a question from Todd, and then we'll have to wrap this up and get to the next agenda item. Go ahead, Todd.
Thank you. Adam, you had said at the start of your presentation that this was all about trust. And that was one of the foundational issues here. And I had clients that were in both of those watersheds that all asked me to participate in those. And they did that on the basis of the data that they had in those watersheds. So my question to you, and I think after that, you and I spoke for probably an hour and a half or so on the phone, just you and I, and we did talk about trust a lot. So my question would be this, these groups of growers are coming in to a theoretical model that is predicting a scarcity of water. But there's no measurable proof yet. We've talked about that a lot. So in that situation, how, once it's already got to this point of a scarcity problem now, whether it's your sweet spot or whether it's a critical one, what suggestions or what did you guys learn? What can you pass on about how do you build trust, in that situation where there's either no data or there's some data, but basically it's a predicted scarcity, as you said. So if trust is the main issue, what did you guys learn and how can we overcome that barrier to build some of that trust so there are productive conversations? I mean, because frankly, they come in and they're hearing, hey, I got to give up 40% of my salary and my land value just dropped by 30%. I hope you got a compelling reason for me. I heard that from several of them. So, what recommendations do you have or what direction do you see that we could push to start building some of that trust?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I think it does really start with the data, the point of data, as you said. And maybe that's where we look to shift sort of where the water user committee process starts. Like, where do we begin this conversation? And we would suggest that the water user committee, they can be, water users can be notified that a water withdrawal assessment tool screening has tripped a site-specific review. I think that's good to sort of give a heads up. But then showing data through however site-specific review would demonstrate that data, I think is a place to start from. And I believe, and Jim Millen, you correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you stated in a water user advisory council meeting that was Eagle's intention, was to demonstrate that there is an impact on the resource before any sort of reduction in withdrawals was implemented.
Well, I would take it as given if and when we get to the point where Eagle convenes a meeting of the water users, where we reach the point where we conclude that yes, in fact, there is an adverse resource impact. And either there's a water user committee already existing, or if there isn't, where the statute requires Eagle to convene that meeting, that a prerequisite will be that, okay, Eagle, you're gonna have to make your case. Convince us that, yeah, there is a problem here.
Yeah, so to your point, Todd, hearing what Jim said, at the point the conversation starts, it's no longer a theoretical issue. There's data, and then if the water user committee wants to push back on that data, that's obviously they can, but it's out of the water withdrawal assessment tool theoretical realm. There's hard data.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, Adam, it's been great. I do appreciate all the work that you've done, and we certainly welcome you to stay around the table as much as your time allows it, because I'm sure you've got a little investment in this topic now and want to see it succeed as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks. And thanks everybody again for all of your time throughout this project. Many of you multiple times.
Thank you. All right, we're on to item 8, Eagle update.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And this is the Eagle program update. I'm gonna try to get through this as quickly as I can here, given the limited time left. So I'm gonna quickly talk about some GR&D hiring updates on the 2020 implementation, progress update on our National Groundwater Monitoring Network for USGS, present the calendar year-to-date metrics for Part 327, and then hopefully have time to answer a few of your questions. So to start with, I'd like to introduce, sitting behind Dave there, Sydney Rahala, who's our new geology specialist 13 in the groundwater data unit. The duties of Sydney's position include managing Eagle's groundwater data management system, which is going to be the Equus, using the Equus software from Earthsoft, and also overseeing the grants from USGS to become a new data provider to the National Groundwater Monitoring Network. In addition, we just wrapped up interviews for a GIS support position, geologist 9 through 11 in the groundwater data unit. Interviews were completed for the groundwater and geological services section manager position. And we've posted 2 geologists 9 through 11 vacancies in the water use assessment unit to backfill 2 vacancies doing SSRs in the unit. So we screen candidates for those positions, and it's with HR, civil service for their credential review. Once we get clearance from them, then we will schedule interviews. Okay, 2020 recommendations. Dave mentioned that the Michigan Hydrologic Framework and the Michigan Integrated Water Management Database grant agreements has now been signed by all parties. Work continues to iron out an agreement between MSU Institute for Water Research and USGS about the subcontracting part of that. Project work group has met to discuss the initial design scope of the environment. Phase 1 of the transition probability mapping project is almost complete and should by tomorrow, according to my notes here, expect to get data from Michigan Geological Survey to complete that part of the project. And the request for proposals for the updating the aquifer properties used by the tool, the aquifer transmissivity and the storage coefficient, that's been published, and we just responded to some questions from the bidders. So that is in process as well. Okay, National Groundwater Monitoring Network. This is a very busy map. You don't really need to read all the details. Main point being that we've got a network of observation wells across the state, some of which are actively being operated by U.S. Geological Survey. A lot of other wells that were installed by USGS that are inactive that we're proposing to locate and start collecting depth of groundwater data. In addition, Michigan Geological Survey has drilled monitoring wells in Allegan County that are being added to the network, and they're going to be drilling additional wells in other counties going forward that will be added to the network as well. I don't see that slide, but that's okay. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Okay, so Eagle was awarded that $92,000 plus grant. Ends in July 2025. Then eligible activities strictly cover Eagle becoming a new data provider. So creating a temporary link between Eagle's current database or databases where the groundwater data is housed and the National Groundwater Monitoring Network. And then once the Equus system is populated, create that final link so that full data ran out of Equus into the National Groundwater Monitoring Network. And as I said, the year 1 progress report has been sent. Next report will be due in 2025. Okay. Year to date. So 179 large quantity withdrawals have been authorized through the water withdrawal assessment tool. Another 116 were authorized through SSRs. We received a total of 132 SSR requests so far in 2024. So I said 116 were authorized, 2 were denied, 7 were retracted by the applicant, and number 7 are still under review as of the time of this slide. Timeliness metrics. Reminder that the current statutory deadline is 10 business days. Average number of days to get or finish an SSR is 14.6. And we were able to get 51% of those done within the 10 business days. Top graph is the long-term trend in the average number of days. And the bottom graph is the trend of the percentage done within the 10 business days. Pre-screening review metrics through the end of September that we do for drinking water division, essentially doing an SSR for drinking water for a proposed community water supply. Total of 20 were done, 5 zone A, 2 zone A geology pass, meaning that the aquifer is not hydraulically connected to streams. 9 zone B, 2 zone C, 0 zone D, and 2 were essentially replacing existing baseline capacity. Andy's 327 permits for newer increased above 2 MGD as of October 1st. Andy's issued 1 permit and he's got another 6 applications in process. Compliance metrics as of October 1st. Total of 88 compliance communications, 4 after the fact. So where we discover an existing withdrawal that has not been authorized and there's enough stream flow to authorize it, we issue a after the fact registration. 4 of those. 1 compliance communication where we're following up on a well log that didn't have any information about the pumping rate. 58 revised registrations, so where withdrawal was put into operation, operated and or installed differently than what was authorized by either the tool or an SSR. If there's enough stream flow available to register the as built as operated, that's what we do. And then another 25 communications to the property owner to try to verify that yes, in fact, they did install their withdrawal. And a total of 15 first violation notices were sent out. This map shows water management areas debited by SSRs that received a Zone D determination, color coded there. And I should note that it doesn't mean that the water management area was necessarily in Zone D before we got the SSR. What it means is that they asked for more water than what was available, so we had to deny it. We weren't able to negotiate a modified withdrawal to met their needs and avoided causing the adverse resource impact, so therefore we ended up denying. And this table is the available stream. First column is the water management area number. Next column is the available stream flow in gallons per minute. And with that, are there any questions? Okay.
That last slide, I don't understand what you were trying to show. Some have negative and some have positive numbers. What are these watersheds?
So where there's a negative, there's currently not enough.
I understand that, but why are these watersheds listed?
These are the watersheds that are represented on the previous.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there are a number of them, like I said,
So
that we had to deny the SSR.
right, okay.
Although there was actually a positive stream flow balance, but not enough to authorize withdrawal as proposed.
Got it. So the ones that are negative right now, regardless of the SSR, there's about
Right.
whatever that number is.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
What was the 517 to 0 and the one just before this?
Yeah, so those are, the red would be the ones that currently have a negative stream flow balance.
Oh, I see.
It ranges, so on every most extreme would be minus 517 all the way up to 0.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't see any questions online. Thanks, Jim. All right, moving on. Our next meeting is November 12th. We talked about the report that will be circulated online, so please read that and provide feedback, so that we can take some action on the 12th, correct? Then the next meeting after that would be on the 10th. Again, I'm not sure what format's in, but, I did want to bring up, we did learn that Tom Frazier, from Michigan Township Association has officially retired from the Water Use Advisory Council. So we do have an opening, in that category. And so he brought that to our attention. So we just learned about that this week. And so we'll work on trying to fill that gap and report out next time whether or not we need some help on that. But that's currently where we're at, that position. For those of you who know that Tom, he's been a long time member of the council. And so I certainly appreciated getting to know Tom and his efforts on this and extended my thanks. So if anybody else feels the same, reach out to Tom and tell him thanks. We talked about quorum, so next one is an important one. So please communicate if you cannot be here, you cannot have your alternate there. All right, we're at the time of the meeting where we have open comments for anything and everything. So does anybody in the room have anything to share, question? Anybody online? Once, twice? All right, so we're out of here. All right, thank you, everybody, for your time. It was a great discussion today, it really was. I appreciate everybody's attention.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
You get to speak.